industry.
As far as the world was concerned, Andy Stone, the head of the Teamsters pension fund, was a legitimate guy.
It's a very auspicious occasion.
A powerful man.
Philip, if you would rise.
He even played golf with the president.
On behalf of the Teamsters pension fund, it's my pleasure to present you.
But Andy also took orders. And when he was told to give a pension fund loan to Philip Green...
for $62,700,000 for the new Tangiers.
He did what he was told.
Now, here was the perfect front man. I mean, what the fuck else could he be? He didn't know too much. He didn't want to know too much, especially that the bosses made the Teamsters lend him the money. He wanted to believe the Teamsters gave him all that fucking money because he was smart.
I say that knowing full well just how much competition we have in this great city.
And where they got Green from? Who the fuck knows? All I know is that Green was an Arizona real estate hustler who barely had enough gas money to come and pick up his own fucking check. And of course it was the boss's man, Andy Stone, who gave all the orders, not the chairman of the fucking board, Philip Green.
I understand.
Alan Glick's rise to power in Las Vegas seemed like the quintessential rags to riches story. A soft-spoken Vietnam veteran turned real estate developer who dared to dream big in the neon-lit desert. But beneath the surface of his meteoric ascent lay a shadowy web of Mafia connections, Teamsters loans, and high-stakes deals with dangerous men. What started as an audacious gamble quickly spiraled into a harrowing tale of mob control, betrayal, and power plays that left Glick at the mercy of figures like Frank Balistrieri, Nick Civella, and Frank Rosenthal. This is the gripping story of a man whose ambition thrust him into the heart of Las Vegas's darkest underworld. Alan Glick was a man full of contradictions, a figure whose unassuming exterior masked a steely resolve that would shock the world of Las Vegas. By 1974, at the age of 31, the balding, owlish San Diego real estate developer had risen to become the second-largest casino operator in the city's history. His meteoric ascent baffled Nevada gaming regulators and veteran casino owners alike. Glick had seemingly materialized out of nowhere, making an impact far out of proportion to his short time in Sin City. Before his rise, Glick's presence in Las Vegas was almost negligible. He first stepped into the desert in 1973, accompanied by 3 partners, with little more than a $3 million loan and a vision. The money was earmarked for developing a parking lot for recreational vehicles on the site of the bankrupt Hacienda Hotel and Casino, a forlorn property clinging to life at the rundown southern end of the Strip. Most would have seen only failure in such a venture, but Glick saw opportunity. At a glance, Glick hardly seemed the type to challenge the establishment. His diminutive stature, receding hairline, and understated mannerisms made him easy to overlook. He spoke so softly he was sometimes barely audible. Yet beneath that mild demeanor was a man forged by extraordinary experiences. Few in Las Vegas at the time knew that Glick had spent 2 harrowing years in Vietnam as a helicopter gunner, earning a Bronze Star. Vietnam taught me that life was short, Glick would later reflect. He often recalled writing letters to his brother-in-law, certain he wouldn't survive the war. Returning home alive transformed his outlook on life. I decided I wasn't going to do things I didn't want to do. Back in the US, Glick turned away from a conventional path. A native of Pittsburgh, he held a bachelor's degree from Ohio State and a law degree from Case Western Reserve, but practicing law was out of the question. I didn't want to be a lawyer, he explained. Instead, he set his sights on California. Moving to San Diego with his wife Kathy and their children, Glick took a job handling legal work for American Housing, the largest multifamily builder in the area. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his entry into the world of real estate. By 1971, Glick had teamed up with a partner, Denny Whitman, a charismatic and somewhat unpredictable figure. Together they embarked on real estate developments involving large land tracts and commercial properties. Then, in 1972, Whitman introduced Glick to Las Vegas, describing a 60-acre plot at the southern end of the Strip. The site held promise as a mobile home park, but there was a catch. The bankrupt Hacienda Hotel sat on the land, along with 3 IRS tax liens. Where Whitman saw obstacles, Glick saw potential. I had this idea that instead of tearing everything down for a parking lot, maybe we could raise the money to revive the hotel and casino, Glick later recounted. His partner, however, was a deeply religious man and wanted no part in gambling. Whitman stepped aside, leaving Glick to pursue the dream alone. At the time, Glick's personal finances were meager. I had $21,000 to my name, he admitted. But what he lacked in resources he made up for with sheer audacity. Using what he later described as smoke and mirrors, Glick and his partners inflated the value of their small development corporation's assets. With this sleight of hand, and some help from well-placed connections at the First American Bank of Tennessee, they secured a $3 million loan. Securing the funding was only the first hurdle. To operate a casino in Las Vegas, Glick needed a license from the Nevada Gaming Commission. At just 29 years old, he became chairman of a Las Vegas casino. It was an extraordinary achievement for a man whose entry into the gaming world had been almost accidental. Yet, for Alan Glick, it was only the beginning, a step into a world where ambition, risk, and danger would collide in ways he could never have anticipated. Within hours of stepping into Las Vegas, it seemed like every hustler, visionary, and dreamer had a proposition for Alan Glick. Deals flowed his way like water down the strip. 5 months after acquiring the hacienda, an air charter operator named Chris Karamanis approached him with a tip that King's Castle in Lake Tahoe was also in financial ruin. The once lavish casino had been foreclosed by none other than the Teamsters pension fund, and Karamanis suggested Glick replicate his hacienda play, take over King's Castle, and bring it back to life. It was through this deal that Glick first crossed paths with Al Barron, the blunt, cigar-chomping manager of the Central States Teamsters pension fund. Karamanis had set up the introduction, and Glick expected to meet a polished financier, someone who reflected the weight of managing billions of dollars in union money. What he found instead was a gruff man who barely glanced at him before growling, "What the fuck are you doing here?" Barron, already annoyed by a previous deal to unload King's Castle that had just fallen apart, made no effort to hide his irritation. When Barron learned that Glick had managed to scrape together the funds to buy the hacienda, his skepticism deepened. "Do you have any money?" he barked. Glick, unfazed, replied honestly, "No, but I might be able to borrow it." Barron, desperate to get the King's Castle mess off the Teamsters' books, begrudgingly told Glick to draft a proposal and promised to return to Las Vegas in 2 weeks. True to his word, Barron returned, but his patience hadn't improved. When Glick handed him the proposal, Barron waved it off in frustration. "I've got no time to read this," he snapped. His instructions were simple: raise the money, secure a mortgage, and let the Teamsters wash their hands of the property. Despite Glick's best efforts, the King's Castle deal ultimately fell apart, but the encounter was far from the end of his dealings with Barron. Not long after, Glick found himself embroiled in a much larger venture, a government office complex in Austin, Texas. This massive project would house federal agencies like the Internal Revenue Service and congressional offices. It was a deal so big that Glick couldn't rely on his usual bank loans. His mind went straight to Barron. After several unanswered calls, Glick finally got a response from Barron's secretary, who tersely told him to stop bothering her boss. Undeterred, Glick left one last message, casually mentioning that he'd been contacted by the federal government about a lucrative development opportunity. Within seconds, his phone rang. It was Barron, fuming. On the line, Barron unleashed a tirade of profanities, calling Glick every name under the sun. Yet, amid the expletives, Glick managed to explain the federal project's legitimacy and potential profitability. By the end of the call, Barron's tone had shifted. "Okay, you son of a bitch," he snarled. "Submit the loan package." The Teamsters jumped at the deal. It was clean, legal, and profitable, everything they wanted. Glick and his partners handled the heavy lifting, and the Teamsters became landlords for the federal government. It was a win for everyone involved. Then came the opportunity of a lifetime. Racket, the holding company that owned both the Stardust and the Fremont casinos, was up for sale. Glick learned that Morris Schenker, the powerful owner of the Dunes, was already in negotiations with Del Coleman, Racket's current owner. However, Schenker's offer was shockingly low, just $42 a share. Glick's accountants dug into the numbers and discovered something extraordinary. The properties were undervalued to such an extent that a buyer could borrow enough to acquire the casinos and still have money left over to cover operational costs. Realizing the potential, Glick acted swiftly. He contacted Coleman and arranged a meeting at Coleman's Manhattan townhouse on East 77th Street. With the urgency of a man who saw his destiny hanging in the balance, Glick boarded a red-eye flight and arrived in New York, ready to seize the deal. It was the type of bold move that defined his career, a calculated gamble with the highest stakes. And, in Las Vegas, the city of risk and reward, it was exactly the kind of play that could change the game forever. Del Coleman was the epitome of sophistication. At the time, he was either married to or engaged to a renowned model, the kind of man whose presence commanded attention in the boardrooms of New York. When Alan Glick approached him with an audacious offer to buy him out, it was a bold move. Glick explained that he already owned the Hacienda Hotel and Casino and had the backing of his development company to support an offer that exceeded Morris Schenker's by at least $2 per share. However, there was a catch. Glick needed time to raise the money. Coleman didn't mince words. He admitted he was already in negotiations with Schenker, and at that very moment, attorneys were drafting the deal. What Glick didn't know was just how close Schenker was to closing. Still, Coleman couldn't ignore Glick's offer. He stated that if Glick could come up with the money, he would have an obligation to inform the shareholders, which could open the door to a competing bid. But Coleman laid down a hard condition. Glick had until noon on Monday to produce a $2 million non-refundable cash payment. The deal would hinge on that. For Glick, this was do or die. It was Friday afternoon, the banks were closed for the weekend, and he didn't have the money. Panicked but determined, he called his partner, Denny Whitman, who immediately agreed to back him. Whitman allowed Glick to use two $500,000 certificates of deposit held by their company in the First American Bank of Tennessee. Additionally, Whitman suggested that Glick try for a $1 million letter of credit from the same bank, where they had strong ties. Glick then called Stephen Neely, the bank's president. The reaction was immediate. "You're crazy," Neely told him. Glick insisted it was the deal of a lifetime. Neely relented but made it clear. "If you're serious, you got to get down here tonight." Desperate to make it to Tennessee in time, Glick found himself stranded. There were no available commercial flights. Thinking fast, he chartered a Learjet from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, putting the entire cost on his credit card, which barely covered it. When he landed in Nashville, Neely met him and immediately questioned the private jet. "Where'd you get the plane?" Neely asked. Glick, not wanting to admit he'd maxed out his credit card, replied, "A friend lent it to me." They spent the entire night working through the necessary documents to secure the letter of credit. Whitman flew in the next day to finalize the arrangements, pledging every available asset. By Sunday morning, everything was complete, and Glick had the $2 million he needed. He flew back to New York, triumphant. From the airport, Glick called Coleman. "Del, I've got your money now, and I don't want to wait until Monday morning." "You've got $2 million?" Coleman asked, incredulous. "It's in my briefcase," Glick replied. They met immediately, filed the escrow papers, and by Monday morning, Coleman notified the Securities and Exchange Commission to halt trading on Recreon stock. Glick had secured his position, but the next step was even bigger, raising the remaining funds to purchase Stardust and Fremont, two of Las Vegas's crown jewels. Back in San Diego, Glick began assembling a list of potential investors. He contacted Al Barron, the Teamsters asset manager, hoping they would support the deal. Barron's response was blunt and chilling. "Listen to me," he said. "I'm giving you the best advice you've ever had. Walk away from this thing. Call the deal off. You have no idea what you're doing. You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Barron's warnings didn't deter Glick. When Teamster support seemed unlikely, his search for investors led him to J.R. Simplot, an unassuming Idaho businessman. Simplot's appearance was deceptively modest. He wore a simple $200 suit and spoke plainly. He expressed interest in financing the deal, but demanded 51% ownership. Glick, unwilling to relinquish control, hesitated. Curious about Simplot's financial standing, Glick called Kenny Solomon at Valley Bank. Solomon didn't need to research. "Simplot could give you $62.7 million right now with a personal check," he said. Simplot, as it turned out, was the largest potato producer in the United States. Nearly every McDonald's French fry came through him. Despite Simplot's staggering wealth, Glick refused to give up control of the company. Instead, he called Barron back with a bold bluff. "In the morning, you're going to hear I'm partnering with J.R. Simplot to buy Recreon and take over the Teamsters' interest in the Stardust and the Fremont." Barron's tone shifted. "Don't do anything until I call you back," he ordered. When he finally returned the call, he told Glick to come to Chicago for a meeting. At the Teamsters Pension Fund office in Chicago, Barron sat Glick down and delivered an education in the inner workings of the system. Trustees were the gatekeepers, Barron explained, and only they could make loan proposals. Proposals were reviewed by an executive committee and then put to a full board vote. Barron then introduced Glick to Frank Ranney, a Teamsters trustee from Milwaukee, who happened to oversee all loans west of the Mississippi. Ranney wasn't alone. He was returning from lunch with Frank Balistrieri, the fearsome Milwaukee mob boss. Barron pointed to Balistrieri. "He could be your link to Frank Ranney," Barron said. The message was clear. Glick was now operating in a world where financial deals and underworld connections blurred, and every step forward came with new risks. Alan Glick's entanglement with the Mafia grew darker and more dangerous with each passing day. At the heart of this web of power, money, and fear stood Frank Balistrieri, the dapper but ominous boss of Milwaukee. Despite his quiet demeanor, Balistrieri's influence was as sharp as the tailored suits he wore. He promised Glick his support, but there was always an implied price. When they met at the hacienda, Balistrieri told Glick that after submitting his loan application to the Teamsters in Chicago, he should visit Milwaukee to meet Balistrieri's sons, John and Joseph. Both attorneys, they were eager to be involved in the Stardust operation. Glick went to Milwaukee, where Balistrieri's sons pitched themselves as indispensable assets. Joseph, with experience running dinner theaters, claimed expertise in entertainment management. Glick, wary of committing, dodged promises, telling them they'd revisit the idea once the deal closed. But by now, Glick felt the pressure mounting. Balistrieri was his key link to Frank Ranney, a crucial Teamster trustee, and without their backing, the deal would collapse. While balancing these negotiations, Glick faced another challenge. Nevada Gaming Control Board member Shannon Bybee requested that Glick take a lie detector test. Though his attorney objected, Bybee insisted it would help ease concerns about Glick's rapid rise in the casino world. Confident in his innocence, Glick agreed and passed the grueling 2-hour test easily, securing the gaming license he needed. Days later, Glick's attorney, Jerry Soloway, called him in a panic. "What are you doing with Frank Balistrieri?" Soloway demanded. When Glick explained his association, including meeting Balistrieri's sons and having dinner at their home, Soloway erupted. "Frank Balistrieri is the Mafia boss of Milwaukee. Your gaming license is at risk just being seen with him." Glick was stunned. He'd met Balistrieri through the Teamsters' offices at lunch with trustee Frank Ranney. Surely, this was legitimate. But Soloway's warnings planted a seed of doubt that would only grow. Despite these concerns, Balistrieri delivered. He called Glick to inform him that the Teamster Executive Committee had approved the first installment of the $62.7 million loan. However, the second part, $65 million for renovations and expansions, faced resistance from Bill Presser, a powerful trustee from Cleveland. Balistrieri arranged to meet Glick in Chicago, where he revealed the complexities of securing the additional funding. During this meeting, Balistrieri reminded Glick about his earlier promise to involve his sons in the operation. Reluctantly, Glick agreed to meet them again in Milwaukee. There, the sons presented an option agreement, allowing them to buy 50% of the company for a nominal fee if Glick ever sold. They pressured him, warning, "Without this, you're going to get turned down tomorrow." Glick refused. He'd sworn to the gaming control board that he had no partners, and licensing for the Balistrieris was out of the question. "If the deal depends on this, I'll walk away," Glick declared. That night, Balistrieri called Glick under the codename Uncle John, urging him to reconsider. When Glick still refused, Balistrieri expressed his disappointment, but assured Glick the deal would move forward. A week later, the loan was approved, and Glick's company, Argent, acquired over 80% of Recrin stock. Shortly after, Glick received another call from Balistrieri. "You need to promote someone," he said. "His name is Frank Rosenthal." Rosenthal arrived at Glick's home in La Jolla, California. Suave and sharp, he wasted no time criticizing the current casino management and outlining his vision for Stardust. Glick, cautious but cornered, gave him a promotion and doubled his salary. However, Glick quickly learned that Rosenthal was more than just an advisor. He was the de facto ruler of Stardust. Rosenthal's influence grew unchecked. He fired employees for minor infractions, hired his own staff, and made sweeping changes without consulting Glick. When confronted, Rosenthal was dismissive, even threatening. At one point, he told Glick outright, "I was placed here not for your benefit, but for others. If you interfere, you won't leave this corporation alive." The breaking point came in March 1975. During dinner at the Stardust, Rosenthal summoned Glick to an emergency meeting in Kansas City. Arriving in the early morning hours, Glick was introduced to Nick Civella, the Mafia boss of Kansas City. Civella, a white-haired man with an icy demeanor, wasted no time in making his position clear. "You reneged on our deal," he said, placing a gun on the table. "You owe us $1.2 million and you're going to let Lefty do whatever he wants." Terrified, Glick explained that he had no agreement with Balistrieri beyond hiring his sons. Civella was incredulous. He believed Balistrieri had been paid a $1.2 million commission for securing the loan and demanded the same for himself. As the meeting ended, Civella warned Glick that his additional Teamster loans would be cut off if he didn't comply. Glick returned to Las Vegas, shaken. He confronted Balistrieri, who confirmed Civella's claims. "What Rosenthal told you is accurate," Balistrieri admitted. Over the following months, Glick tried to sideline Rosenthal, but the power dynamic had shifted. Rosenthal operated with impunity, undermining Glick at every turn. The Mafia had turned Glick's dream of a casino empire into a nightmare. His position of authority was an illusion, and the true power lay with the mobsters who had engineered his rise. For Alan Glick, the glittering lights of Las Vegas, concealed a darkness he could no longer escape. What you've just heard is only the beginning, a tantalizing glimpse into the forces that would eventually lead to the fall of Las Vegas, one of organized crime's most glittering and valuable strongholds. At its height, Las Vegas wasn't merely a city of neon lights and casinos. It was a masterpiece of corruption and influence, a sandbox for mobsters and moguls alike. Politicians, judges, public officials, senators, and even mayors flocked to its smoky lounges and glittering floors, not just for entertainment, but to be bought, sold, and ensnared in webs of bribery that redefined the limits of power. This wasn't just a mob playground. It was their private stage, where deals were struck under chandeliers and secrets were buried in vaults guarded by silence and fear. When Jack Ruby silenced Lee Harvey Oswald with a single gunshot, the payout wasn't cash in hand, but a single wager, placed by his brother in a casino tied to Carlos Marcello. That single bet made him a rich man, and it served as a deadly message to anyone considering loose lips. In this game, silence was golden, and life was cheap. The origins of this empire lie in the sands of the desert, where Jewish and Italian gangsters joined forces to transform a barren wasteland into a gold mine. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel was the first to bring Mafia money into Las Vegas, paving the way for Italian syndicates like the Maceo family to lay their claim. Soon, Chicago, New Orleans, and Midwest crime families controlled the Strip, not just skimming millions from the top, but creating a culture of control that extended to celebrities and entertainers. They didn't just own the casinos, they owned the stars themselves. By indebting singers and performers to their house, they turned them into assets, providing free entertainment that became the lifeblood of their empire. By the 1970s, this desert oasis had become a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut, but it wasn't invincible. Men like Alan Glick would unknowingly help bring it to its knees, though not without a push from forces far darker and more dangerous. The world of organized crime was shifting, and at the center of this seismic change was one man, Frank Balistrieri. Nicknamed the Octopus, Balistrieri was the undisputed boss of Milwaukee's Underworld, a college-educated white-collar criminal with a ruthless streak that left local gangsters trembling in his wake. Fear and respect followed him in equal measure. But even Balistrieri wasn't an island. His power was tethered to alliances with the Chicago outfit, the New Orleans crime syndicate, and the sprawling Midwest families. These connections tied Milwaukee's rackets directly to the heart of Las Vegas, where money and influence flowed like water down the Strip. This is the story of their rise and their inevitable fall. In this Press Bonanza series, we'll trace the threads of Milwaukee's underworld, beginning in 1963 when the Kennedy administration launched its assault on organized crime. We'll dive into the 1960s and follow the shifting tides of power into the 1980s, when the FBI's relentless pursuit zeroed in on figures like Frank Balistrieri, Joey Aiuppa, Tony Spilotro, and Jackie Cerrone. These men once held the keys to Vegas, but their downfall marked the end of an era. From the dark alleys of Milwaukee to the glittering lights of the Stardust and Fremont casinos, this tale of ambition, betrayal, and destruction will unravel the empire that reshaped America's criminal landscape. One that inspired films like Casino and became the stuff of legend. What these men built was extraordinary, but their fall was nothing short of catastrophic. In 1963, the quiet streets of Milwaukee masked a storm brewing beneath the surface. A web of crime and corruption centered on one enigmatic figure, Frank Balistrieri. This article from the Chicago Tribune delves into the rise of Milwaukee's Octopus, a man who blended intellect with ruthless ambition to command the city's rackets. Balistrieri's connections to Chicago and Kansas City mobsters, his influence over gambling and vice, and his ability to evade conviction despite mounting investigations reveal a dangerous power that defied the law. As state officials close in through a secret inquiry, the shadowy world of Milwaukee's underworld begins to unravel. a gangster who went to college and spent 6 months in law school, is described by state investigators as the king of rackets here. He is a slim, quiet man, Frank Balistrieri, 45. But state officials, ordered by Governor John Reynolds to investigate the rise of organized crime in Milwaukee and other areas of Wisconsin, discovered that Balistrieri's mild manner was deceiving. The file assembled on Balistrieri in the state crime investigation is solid documentation of his control over vice, gambling and strip-tease joints in Milwaukee. Also listed in the state's reports on Balistrieri are his connections with other big city gangs, including the Chicago crime syndicate. So tight are the bonds between Balistrieri and the crime chiefs of Kansas City and Chicago, according to Wisconsin officials, that hoodlums from both cities have gained powerful influence in the Milwaukee underworld. The Chicago gangsters linked to Balistrieri by the state crime investigation have established themselves here as loan sharks and jukebox racketeers. State agents identified the Chicago hoodlums as Felix Milwaukee Phil Aldericio, Albert Obby Frabotta, Americo Pete DePieto, Sam Teets Battaglia, and Charles Chuck English. Their meetings with Balistrieri in a downtown Milwaukee restaurant have been observed by state investigators and Milwaukee police. A deal for horse race bookie service between Balistrieri's gangsters and the Chicago mob was exposed in 1961 by United States Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The Justice Department found that the Balistrieri hoodlums had been awarded gambling rights in Illinois, near Antioch Lake County, as a reward for their services to the Chicago mob in bootlegging horse race results across the state line. Dealers and croupiers then were trained in Wisconsin by the Milwaukee hoodlums and sent to work near Antioch, Kennedy said. The Milwaukee gangsters backed out of Illinois a few months later when federal legislation banned the interstate flow of gambling information. Since the early 1950s, according to state officials, Balistrieri has been the boss of Milwaukee Rackets. His college education was 98 semester hours as an undergraduate, and 6 months in law school may have helped him in steering a course around the law. He never has been convicted of a crime, although he has been under constant investigation for the last 2 years by Milwaukee police, agents of the Wisconsin Attorney General, and the Internal Revenue Service. The multiple investigations did not deter Frank Balistrieri from tightening his control over the rackets in Milwaukee. According to state officials and Milwaukee County District Attorney William McCauley, enforcers working for Balistrieri began extorting monthly payoffs from gamblers and nightclub owners in the city just 2 months ago. Some of these gamblers and cafe owners had operated independently of the Balistrieri gang for years. Their independence came to an abrupt end last November. At that time, Milwaukee police received reports that Balistrieri's men were pressuring the independents, demanding partnerships in their rackets, and taking an off-the-top share of the profits. State officials informed the Tribune that these extortion demands were carried out by 4 gangsters closely associated with Balistrieri. The identified men were Joseph Joey G. Guerrera, 38, Steve DeSalvo, 36, Bustiano Vito Buster Balistrieri, 45, and Frank Stello, 57. McCauley, Milwaukee County's prosecutor, stated that police had shown photographs of these 4 individuals to alleged victims of the shakedowns, but no identifications could be obtained. Guerrera, a former Kansas City hoodlum, had been arrested 25 times by Kansas City police between 1944 and 1960 on charges ranging from murder, robbery and burglary to molesting women and gambling. Yet he had consistently escaped conviction. Arriving in Milwaukee last year, Guerrera promptly, according to a state official, began calling the shots for Balistrieri. Bustiano Balistrieri also had ties to Kansas City. In 1936 he was convicted of moonshining and sentenced to 5 years of probation. Hoodlum DeSalvo, described as a pigeon-toed hoodlum, has only 1 conviction on record. In 1946, he served 30 days in jail in Milwaukee for possession of counterfeit sugar ration stamps. Frank Stello, meanwhile, is an ex-convict who served time in Waupun State Prison for robbery. The connections between Balistrieri and state officials prior to Stello's parole are currently under investigation as part of the state's inquiry into organized crime. Milwaukee officials, many of whom deny the existence of organized crime in their city, choose their words carefully when discussing Balistrieri and his associates. Police Chief Howard Johnson described Balistrieri as an octopus. "We are reducing his empire," Johnson said. "We are cutting him down, but I cannot prove that he isn't organized crime." The chief explained that his nickel and dime comment referred to the department's constant surveillance of Frank Balistrieri's mobsters. District Attorney William McCauley described Balistrieri as a man upon whom the finger of suspicion rests. McCauley further identified Joseph Guerrera and Steve DeSalvo as Milwaukee's bad boys. Meanwhile, investigators working for Wisconsin Attorney General George Thompson stated unequivocally that Balistrieri and his henchmen were primary targets in the investigation of organized crime in Milwaukee. The state's probe into Milwaukee's rackets is being conducted through a secret John Doe inquiry overseen by Circuit Judge John Coffey. In such a hearing, the judge acts as a one-man grand jury, hearing testimony from witnesses and issuing warrants that are comparable to indictments in the Illinois court system. Warrants are expected to be issued next week as part of the investigation. The John Doe inquiry has drawn criticism from Milwaukee Mayor Henry Meyer, District Attorney McCauley, and Police Chief Johnson. However, the inquiry uncovered crucial evidence during a gambling raid last year, revealing that Guerrera and DeSalvo were extorting monthly payoffs from gamblers in Milwaukee. During the raid, John Doe investigators targeted a gambling room on Pierce Street that accepted horse bets by telephone. DeSalvo appeared during the raid and entered the room using a key. Outside, in a parked car, investigators found Guerrera. While the two men were being questioned by detectives, one officer searching the gambling headquarters discovered $2,400 hidden in a shoebox. Informants later told authorities that the money was the monthly tax the two gangsters intended to collect from the bookmaker. Milwaukee's clean-cut reputation faces a stark challenge in this investigative report, as Governor John Reynolds confronts city officials' insistence that organized crime doesn't exist in their jurisdiction. While the mayor and police chief firmly deny any mob activity, secret John Doe. Hearings have unearthed shocking allegations, mob-run shakedowns, racketeering, and ties to national crime syndicates infiltrating everything from vice to the cheese industry. At the heart of the probe is Frank Balistrieri, the elusive, college-educated gangster accused of wielding unchecked power over Milwaukee's underworld. As state and federal investigations intensify, and with the mysterious disappearance of a jukebox distributor fueling speculation, the veneer of Milwaukee's innocence may soon crack wide open. Milwaukee Police Chief Howard Johnson firmly asserts that there is no organized crime in his city. His stance is supported by District Attorney William J. McCauley, who confidently states, "Organized crime does not exist in Milwaukee County." Mayor Henry Meyer goes even further, proclaiming, "I would bet my bottom dollar that Milwaukee, for its size, is the cleanest city in the country. If there is any semblance of organized crime in our city, it has never reached my ears." However, Governor John W. Reynolds strongly disagrees, accusing the city's officials of selling the people a bill of goods. By maintaining for years that Milwaukee is the cleanest city in the world. Reynolds expressed his views during a recent interview with a Chicago Tribune reporter. The publication of his statements last week sparked a chain reaction that resonated across the state. The newspaper reported that an investigation initiated by Reynolds during his tenure as Attorney General had uncovered a network of organized crime in Wisconsin, with its roots in Milwaukee, Kenosha, and Fond du Lac counties. The investigation revealed a shakedown racket operated by mobsters in Milwaukee, targeting gamblers, vice racketeers, nightclub owners, and jukebox operators. It also uncovered efforts to consolidate all local rackets under mob control and a disturbing foray by gangsters, linked to national crime syndicates, into Wisconsin's cheese industry. These revelations marked the first public disclosure of the scope of the secret John Doe hearings that have been underway in Milwaukee for nearly a year. In Wisconsin, a John Doe hearing, conducted before a single judge, serves the same function as a grand jury in other states. Instead of issuing indictments, the judge can authorize warrants if sufficient evidence is presented. Although no warrants have been issued from the Milwaukee proceedings thus far, some are anticipated soon. Meanwhile, officials in Kenosha announced plans for a closed meeting with Reynolds on Monday. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, which has been assisting Kenosha authorities since January 10th in the case of a missing jukebox distributor, has now been directed by United States Attorney General Robert Kennedy to launch a full-scale investigation. The missing man, Anthony Biernat, 46 years old, remains unaccounted for. In light of these developments, Governor Reynolds has called for the establishment of a 5-man crime task force under the state attorney general. He emphasized that such a unit is urgently needed to cope with the crime syndicate. Governor John Reynolds' earlier disclosures sparked a barrage of angry oratory in the state legislature, with much of the criticism aimed squarely at him. The Milwaukee Sentinel editorial board accused the governor of a broad and reckless smear. George Thompson, who took over as Attorney General earlier this month when Reynolds assumed the governorship, also criticized the governor. Thompson called Reynolds' untimely assertions of organized crime in various parts of the state potentially harmful, saying they could seriously jeopardize the Milwaukee John Doe hearings and any prosecutions that may result from the investigations. Interestingly, however, the Chicago Tribune reporter cited Thompson as one of the sources of information for the story. This dynamic is underscored by the fact that Thompson is a Republican, while Reynolds is a Democrat. The John Doe hearings in Milwaukee were so secretive that they had been underway for several weeks before their existence was publicly revealed early last summer. Initially, it was believed the hearings were limited to irregularities in the clerk of court's office concerning the reporting of traffic violations. Within the past month, the hearings have faced criticism from Milwaukee Mayor Henry Meyer, District Attorney William McCauley, and other local officials. The hearings are overseen by Circuit Judge John Coffey, with Leroy Dalton, an Assistant Attorney General, serving as the chief investigator. Recently, Reynolds appointed Richard Cates, a Madison attorney, as a special prosecutor. Cates declined to comment on the inquiry, telling reporters, "Any comment on my part would be disclosing in effect what is in the John Doe. My job is to prepare any provable cases from the secret inquiry." The Chicago Tribune reported that Frank Balistrieri is one of the primary targets of the investigation. Described as a 45-year-old college-educated gangster, Balistrieri is believed to control vice, gambling, and striptease establishments in Milwaukee. Despite his alleged influence, he has never been convicted of a crime. Adding to the intrigue surrounding the investigation is the recent unexplained disappearance of jukebox distributor Anthony Biernat, which has intensified interest in organized crime in Wisconsin. This investigation also brings to mind 3 gangland-style murders in Milwaukee over the past 10 years, all of which remain unsolved. The victims included a tavern owner, a restaurant operator, and a nightclub owner. Frank Balistrieri, the so-called king of rackets in Milwaukee, confronts the mounting accusations of his underworld ties with indignation and defiance. Amid ongoing John Doe hearings and sensational allegations of mob connections, Balistrieri paints himself as a hard-working family man, unjustly targeted by the press and law enforcement. He scoffs at claims of organized crime in Milwaukee, asserting that the city's underworld is nothing more than a state of fantasy concocted by overzealous investigators. Yet, as police surveillance tightens and federal inquiries intensify, Balistrieri's denials clash with a growing narrative of jukebox rackets, mob influence, and clandestine operations lurking behind Milwaukee's seemingly pristine facade. Tavern keeper Frank Balistrieri, characterized in recent articles published outside of Milwaukee as a Milwaukee gang chief and king of rackets, is boiling with indignation. He scoffs at reports that organized crime exists in Milwaukee. His ire has been aroused by the Tribune's character assassination of his long, hard-working business career. He is angry about the continual police surveillance of his business activities. He operates a strip-tease place called the Downtown Bar, 340 West Wells Street here. Balistrieri, who has never been convicted of a crime, poured out his grievances in a 3-hour interview. The interview had been sought ever since the Chicago Tribune on January 24th printed these accusations by reporter Sandy Smith, who wrote that Balistrieri is a gangster who went to college, spent months in law school, and since the early 50s has been the king of the rackets in Milwaukee. Balistrieri has connections with other big city gangs, including the Chicago Crime Syndicate. So tight are the bonds between Balistrieri and the crime chiefs of Kansas City and Chicago that hoodlums from both cities have gained powerful influence in the Milwaukee underworld. The Chicago gangsters linked to Balistrieri have established themselves here as loan sharks and jukebox racketeers. Such Chicago hoodlums as Felix, Milwaukee Phil, Aldericio, Albert Obby, Frabota, Americo Pete DePieto, Sam Teets Battaglia, and Charles Chuck English have held meetings with Balistrieri in a downtown Milwaukee restaurant. Balistrieri hoodlums were awarded gambling rights in Illinois near Antioch in Lake County as a reward for their services to the Chicago mob in bootlegging horse race results across the state line. Balistrieri contends that there is no underworld in Milwaukee and that he has never been in Antioch. He told the reporters that he was hopeful that the interview would correct the distorted image that he claimed the Tribune and the Milwaukee Police Department had painted of him, particularly since the kidnapping of Anthony J. Biernat, Kenosha jukebox distributor. Battaglia and Charles Chuck English have held meetings with Balistrieri in a downtown Milwaukee restaurant. Balistrieri hoodlums were awarded gambling rights in Illinois near Antioch, Lake County, as a reward for their services to the Chicago mob in bootlegging horse race results across the state line. Balistrieri contends that there is no underworld in Milwaukee and that he has never been in Antioch. He told the reporters that he was hopeful the interview would correct the distorted image he claimed the Tribune and the Milwaukee Police Department had painted of him, particularly since the kidnapping of Anthony Biernat, a Kenosha jukebox distributor. Authorities said Biernat was assassinated by the underworld after he apparently refused to allow hoodlums to muscle in on his jukebox business. His battered body was found buried in the cellar of an old house on the abandoned Bong Air Force Base. Balistrieri said he had never met Biernat. He scoffed at published theories that Biernat was killed by hired killers and that they were hired in Milwaukee. He said professional killers would not have bungled Biernat's killing, as it was described, and that Milwaukee had no professional killers. Balistrieri made no bones about being fed up with the out-of-town newspaper articles, as well as the police tail on him and his business operations. He challenged the Milwaukee Police Department to open its file of allegations against him and to prove them. "There is no justification for the bad publicity I have been getting," Balistrieri said. "Sometimes I am embarrassed for my friends and the entertainers working for me. I am strictly a family man. I work 7 days a week. I work hard. I do not gamble. I do not take vacations. I lived in a humble home on Humboldt Avenue for many years, until I bought a new house in 1960 so that my family could enjoy a few comforts of life. The home is heavily mortgaged." Balistrieri, 44, lives with his wife, the former Antonia Aliotto, who was his childhood sweetheart, and their 4 children, in a $36,000 home at 3043 North Shepherd Avenue. When the home was purchased on October 22, 1960, Balistrieri and his wife obtained a $20,000 mortgage from the Catholic Knights of Wisconsin. Balistrieri said the mortgage was still big, but I do not know exactly the amount. Balistrieri said he wished the police would open their files on him to reputable newspapermen because I would like to get them, the police, off my back. If the police can prove any of their allegations, I will be willing to get out of business immediately, he said. I would be even willing to go away, as far away as China. However, if the allegations cannot be proved, I want the police to leave me alone and allow me to operate my business like any other businessman does, without police interference. Balistrieri was interviewed in Gallagher's Steakhouse, 829 North 3rd Street, which is operated by a corporation headed by his brother, Peter, 43. Frank Balistrieri complained that constant surveillance of Gallagher's had interfered with the smooth operation of the night spot, which often features big-name entertainers. Sometimes the police even take pictures of patrons coming into the place, Balistrieri said. On occasion, as many as 8 police officers have blocked the entrance, causing people to steer clear of the place. Asked what his connection with Gallagher's was, Balistrieri replied, I spend a lot of time at Gallagher's because I have to have a place to go. I know a lot of entertainers and help book the shows for my younger brother, Peter, who runs Gallagher's. Over at the Downtowner, which is the only tavern I run, there are only 20 stools and 5 booths. No food is served at the Downtowner, so I spend a lot of time at Gallagher's and eat here too. Balistrieri said the police and the city directory were wrong in stating that Buster Vive Balistrieri, 1634 North Jackson Street, was manager of Gallagher's. He said Balistrieri merely worked there as a maintenance man and mechanic, without referring by name to Governor Reynolds, who recently stated that organized crime flourished in 3 areas of the state. The counties of Milwaukee, Kenosha, and Fond du Lac. Balistrieri made these observations. Milwaukee is a good city to live in. It is one of the cleanest cities in the United States, as far as I know. Any statement that organized crime exists in Milwaukee is strictly political. In 17 years of business, nobody has ever tried to shake me down or muscle into my business. In answer to a series of questions, Balistrieri said he knew Joseph, Joey G. Guerrera, 37, of 2608 East Newport Avenue, Steve DeSalvo, 44, of 2605 East Holmes Avenue, Cudahy, and Francis Stello, 50, of 1315 North 59th Street. The Chicago Tribune stated that these men and Buster Balistrieri were Balistrieri's sidekicks, who carried out extortion demands on independent jukebox distributors. The wives of Buster Balistrieri and Guerrera are sisters from Kansas City. Their birth name was Marchese. Peter Balistrieri is married to Buster Balistrieri's sister from Kansas City. Thus, Buster Balistrieri is not related to Frank Balistrieri, but Peter Balistrieri and Buster Balistrieri are brothers-in-law. Balistrieri vigorously denied the Chicago Tribune's charges. He insisted that he had absolutely no interest in the jukebox industry. Commenting on his acquaintance with Guerrera, DeSalvo, Stello, and Balistrieri, Balistrieri said, "When you are in business for 17 years like I am, you get to know a lot of people. I even know state Supreme Court justices and other judges." The journalist sat across from Frank Balistrieri in the smoky back room of the Downtowner bar. The low hum of city noise filtered through the walls, but inside it was just the two of them. Frank, calm but visibly irritated, leaned back in his chair, a cigarette balanced between his fingers. The journalist didn't waste time. "Let's get straight to it, Frank. Is DeSalvo on your payroll?" Balistrieri raised an eyebrow, almost offended by the question. "No," he said flatly, his voice firm but restrained. The journalist didn't flinch. "What about Guerrera? Is he on your payroll?" Another drag of the cigarette. "No." "And Stello? Is he on your payroll?" The journalist pushed, watching Frank's face closely for a crack in his composure. "No," Frank replied again, but this time he added with a wave of his hand. "He used to work for me, back when I ran Gallagher Meat Company. That was in the 2400 block of North 3rd Street, back in 1960. It was a wholesale meat business. I had it for about a year, and then I sold it. Stello worked there for a bit. He also did some time at Gallagher's." The journalist scribbled a note, but didn't let up. "How long have you known Guerrera?" Frank tilted his head as if calculating the years. "About 6, maybe 7 years," he said. "He came here from Kansas City about a year ago." "Do you know about his police record?" The journalist leaned forward, the question sharp and pointed. Frank shook his head, a thin smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "No, I don't know anything about that," he said, his tone making it clear he was done with the topic. The journalist leaned back, his pen still poised. The room grew quieter, save for the rhythmic tap of the journalist's pen against his notepad and the faint crackle of Frank's cigarette. Balistrieri's answers were concise, his demeanor unshaken, as if daring the journalist to find something he hadn't already rehearsed. Kansas City police records show that Guerrera was fined $100 on a hit-and-run charge in 1944, $10 for disturbing the peace in 1945, $100 in 1951 for operating a policy racket, and fined 7 other times from $1 to $15 between 1943 and 1952 on gambling charges. Guerrera also was indicted by the Jackson County, Missouri grand jury on an arson charge, but the case was dismissed on March 4, 1959, on the ground that the complaining witness could not be found. The Kansas City Star, in reporting on an interim report of a grand jury investigating underworld activities, stated on May 2, 1950, that Guerrera, a gunman himself and enforcer, was injected as a partner into a policy operation without investing any money or doing any work. Balistrieri said he was not associated in any way with Stello, Guerrera or DeSalvo. Guerrera and DeSalvo, on January 28th, were questioned by Kenosha detectives in connection with Biernat's disappearance. They told the detectives that they did not know Biernat or anything about the Lakeside Music Company, which he had operated in Kenosha. Guerrera and DeSalvo said they were partners in the operation of the Checker Cleaners, 1012 South 1st Street, formerly known as Asino Cleaners. DeSalvo, one of 4 men charged with commercial gambling after a Southside raid on September 5th, won dismissal on Friday in county court. DeSalvo was seized by raiders when he let himself into the apartment at 3014 West Pierce Street with a key. He told officers that he was an electrician. Guerrera was arrested while waiting in a car outside the building. He was questioned but was not charged. Guerrera is awaiting trial on a charge of making an illegal U-turn. He was arrested on this charge on October 11th in the 500 block of North 7th Street. He and DeSalvo told Kenosha detectives on January 28th that they had been followed by Milwaukee detectives for 2 or 3 months. Balistrieri described Stello as a hard worker who never touches liquor and sticks only to 7-Up. He said he could not understand why police should be tailing Stello after he had paid his debt to society. Stello's police record includes convictions for armed robbery, and assault. He is awaiting trial, set for March 4th, on a charge of deviating in traffic on January 4th on the 27th Street Viaduct. Stello was driving a white 1958 Thunderbird. He was released from the state prison at Waupun only 17 days before. After that, I went into the cinder and hauling business with my father. What about the Para Corporation on 500 West Florida Street? Do you have an interest there? Yes, Balistrieri said. I'm the secretary of the company. It's a packaging firm. I own about 25% of the stock. Another reporter leaned forward, pen hovering over his notepad. Do you have any other financial investments besides the Downtowner and the Para Corporation? No, he replied flatly. What about Phil Valley? The reporter pressed, referring to the Labour leader Balistrieri had once partnered with in boxing promotions. Do you have any business interests with him now? No, Balistrieri said, his tone unchanged. And Ben Barwick, the business manager of the Milwaukee Bartenders Union? Only as much as is necessary to operate my tavern, he answered, giving little away. The reporters weren't letting up. Have you seen Felix Milwaukee Phil Aldericio? One asked, invoking the name of a notorious Chicago underworld figure. Not in 6 or 7 years, Balistrieri said, his voice calm but clipped. Were you at Tony Accardo's daughter's wedding in 1961? Another asked, referring to the reputed boss of Chicago's crime syndicate. No, Balistrieri replied, shaking his head slightly. Do you have any brothers besides Peter? Came the next question. No, he said simply. What church do you attend, and are you affiliated with any organizations? I attend St. Rita's Catholic Church on North Cass and East Pleasant Streets, Balistrieri said, his tone softening just a bit. I'm also a member of the St. Joseph's Home for Children Athletic Association. The next question came almost as an afterthought. Does John Aliotto, your father-in-law, have an interest in Aliotto's on Highway 100 near West Burleigh Street? I do not know, Balistrieri said, leaning back slightly. And what schools did you attend? Another reporter asked. But Balistrieri hesitated for just a second before the conversation shifted, leaving the question hanging in the air. The reporters exchanged glances, their pens scratching furiously. Balistrieri remained stoic, but the tension in the room was undeniable, the unanswered questions lingering like smoke from a fire that hadn't quite been put out. I was born on May 27th, 1918. I grew up on the East Side and graduated from Lincoln High School. I attended Marquette University's Liberal Arts School for 3 years, 1935 to 1938. I then entered law school in 1939. When attending Marquette, I got married. Later, when my son was born, I decided his father ought to be a lawyer. So I returned to Marquette to study law but never finished. I dropped out before I had enough credits for a degree. Balistrieri explained that his first venture in the tavern business came shortly after his college days, when his grandfather, the late Peter Balistrieri, gave him the old hillside at 801 West Clybourne Street. Shortly afterward, he started a jukebox business. In 1946, Balistrieri bought the business most Milwaukeeans knew him by the former Roosevelt Hotel and Melody Room Night Spot, 412 West Wells Street. It was razed in 1960. Since 1952, Balistrieri has been president of Ben K, Incorporated, the tavern corporation that operates the Downtowner. He said he gets a good salary from the operation and makes a comfortable living. You must also remember, however, that I saved some money while I was president of the Badger State Boxing Club, a firm in which my brother and father, Joseph, were stockholders. He said he had given up his interest in the club in 1957. Robert Sullivan, an assistant city attorney, presented the city's case. One alderman charged that the police department, the city attorney's office, the Milwaukee Journal and other forces in the community were persecuting Balistrieri. Another urged the license committee to introduce an ordinance to prohibit a dangerous alliance of tavern and coin machine operations. Present at the hearing was Leroy Dalton, an assistant attorney general, and now Chief John Doe investigator. Balistrieri is expected to be called for questioning in the John Doe probe being conducted by Circuit Judge John Coffey. Balistrieri is awaiting trial on March 14th before County Judge Christ Seraphim on a charge of permitting female employees to sit with male customers at the Downtowner bar. Balistrieri, Joseph Enea, 30, of 2510 West Glendale Avenue, his bartender, and 2 entertainers, Patricia Bogg, 33, of 729 North 11th Street, and Shirley Amber, 26, of 2922 West Wells Street, were charged on September 7th in connection with the alleged tavern offence. Enea and Balistrieri were charged with allowing the two women to sit with male patrons. The women were charged with violating the same city ordinance. Balistrieri claims that Captain John Lavin's police special assignment squad operates in a state of fantasy and has visions of underworld characters cropping up all around town. He has praise, however, for some policemen, particularly Captain Harry Kuzewski of the Police Morals Squad, who, he claims, has done a wonderful job in keeping this town free of prostitutes, pimps, and gamblers. Frank Balistrieri and his brother Peter have long been friends of Kuzewski. There are some things that I really detest: prostitutes, sex perverts, and narcotic peddlers and users, said Balistrieri. I have never tolerated prostitutes to operate in my tavern, or entertainers to hustle drinks. Balistrieri said he thought that Johnson is an honest chief, even though we have had our differences. But he allows too many of his policemen to walk around in a state of fantasy and harass my customers and me, Balistrieri said. In a scene that could have been ripped from a Hollywood crime thriller, federal agents descended on the home of Frank Balistrieri, Milwaukee's notorious crime boss, in a high-stakes raid that has sent shockwaves through the city. Armed with a warrant signed by U.S. District Judge Robert Warren, the FBI didn't just stop at Balistrieri's stately residence. They also hit his son's Shorecrest Hotel, where they uncovered a jaw-dropping haul, $200,000 in cash, stashed in a safe, divided into 4 envelopes of $50,000 each. The raid, unfolding like a calculated spectacle, left neighbors frozen in disbelief as agents wielded a sledgehammer to breach Balistrieri's door. They rang the bell and knocked, but when no one answered, out came the hammer, recounted Bruce Krivitsky, a stunned neighbor who watched the drama unfold. Additional agents poured onto the scene, their numbers swelling as Balistrieri himself remained conspicuously absent, his whereabouts shrouded in mystery. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's search also targeted multiple properties tied to Balistrieri's shadowy empire, marking a bold escalation in the government's probe into Milwaukee's underworld. Court filings have already labeled the 61-year-old as the organized crime czar of the region, and the timing of the raid couldn't be more ominous. A federal grand jury in Milwaukee is actively investigating his activities. Meanwhile, John Glover, the special agent in charge of the Milwaukee FBI office, remained tight-lipped about the operation's outcome, revealing only that he had seen Balistrieri earlier in the day, but refusing to disclose where. No arrests were made, fueling speculation and intensifying intrigue around the crime boss's next move. With agents prying open safes and uncovering stacks of illicit cash, this raid has peeled back yet another layer of Milwaukee's criminal underworld, casting an unforgiving spotlight on the Balistrieri family. The operation has left the city buzzing with questions. Who is protecting Balistrieri? And what secrets still lie hidden in the vaults of his empire? A sweeping federal investigation has unveiled a vast web of organized crime stretching across the Midwest and into the glittering casinos of Las Vegas. At the heart of this probe are 3 powerful Mafia families from Chicago, Kansas City, and Milwaukee, with Anthony Big Tuna Accardo, Nick Tivella, and Frank Balistrieri leading the charge. Court documents and wiretaps reveal shocking details of skimmed casino revenues, secret stock options, and deep ties to the Teamsters Union Pension Fund. The investigation exposes a hidden hierarchy, with Balistrieri and his sons holding lucrative options in Las Vegas properties under the shadow of Chicago's oversight. As federal agents seize records, intercept coded calls, and subpoena key players, including former casino tycoon Alan Glick, the sinister influence of the Midwest Mafia over America's gambling capital is finally laid bare. 3. Midwestern Mafia families have emerged at the center of a Chicago federal grand jury investigation, which links them to the secret operation of major gambling casinos in Las Vegas. The Tribune has learned the inquiry by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Justice Department lawyers is aimed at the top bosses of mob families in Chicago, Kansas City, and Milwaukee. The investigation deals with skimmed or unreported wagers, which investigators suspect are diverted from casino counting rooms and then laundered as operating capital through a variety of outwardly legitimate mob businesses. Details of the investigation are set forth in some 1,400 pages of court documents examined by the Tribune in Las Vegas, Kansas City, and Milwaukee. Using court-approved wiretaps, break-ins to plant listening devices, and searches of homes, offices, and even garbage cans, investigators have gathered extensive evidence which indicates that the Chicago mob, led by Anthony Big Tuna Accardo, Jackie Cerrone, and Joey Dove Zayupa, is the leadership in the combined Tri-City mob's activity in Las Vegas. Midwest mobsters have exerted influence over the Chicago-based Teamster Union pension fund, from which they easily have obtained huge loans in recent years to expand and remodel certain Las Vegas casinos and hotels. That Milwaukee mob chieftain, Frank Balistrieri, has struck it rich there. This includes a document now in the hands of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is described as an exclusive option by Balistrieri's two sons to purchase shares in a firm controlling two major Las Vegas casino hotels. Similarly, according to records seized by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Las Vegas, additional stock options for 50% ownership of the same hotels were held by a key representative of Chicago hoodlums. He is Frank Lefty Rosenthal, for years one of the mob's overseers in Las Vegas. That there are links among underworld figures of the Tri-City gang to suspected plots to corrupt public officials who are charged with regulating and enforcing Nevada gambling laws. A major phase of the government probe is to unfold in April, when the Chicago federal grand jury is scheduled to take testimony from a dozen witnesses. Eventually, the witness list is expected to include top mob bosses and lower-level gamblers, money couriers, and frontmen for Racket's activity. Reportedly among the witnesses who have been subpoenaed to testify is Alan Glick, the 39-year-old financial wizard whose rise to power as a top Las Vegas real estate and casino tycoon coincided with loans totaling $95 million from the Teamster Union pension fund to his company, Argent Corporation, which at one time owned the Stardust, Fremont, and Hacienda hotels and casinos. It was in Argent that the options to purchase stock were held. Rosenthal and Balistrieri's sons, Joseph and John, of Milwaukee, held casino stock purchase options through Argent Corporation, according to hidden interest records seized by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation documents, about which Glick is expected to be questioned, charge that more than $100,000 in revenue may have been diverted from the Stardust Casino to Joseph Balistrieri. The same documents assert that the Frank Balistrieri syndicate is answerable to the Chicago organized crime family. Earlier this month, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents in Milwaukee reported confiscating $200,000 in cash from a safe in a hotel there, owned by Joseph Balistrieri. In addition, the agents executed warrants on 6 other locations, including the home of Frank Balistrieri, in a search for evidence of skimming, gambling, and ownership of restaurants and vending and amusement supply firms. According to a 60-page inventory, the agents removed briefcases, boxes, and envelopes stuffed with such items as internal audits of Argent, daily analysis reports by the managers of the Stardust, Fremont, and Hacienda hotels, an accountant's report on a proposed casino, lease agreements on still other unidentified Las Vegas businesses, and travel records to that city. At one point in the search of Frank Balistrieri's home, in which the inventory said detailed casino records were found, the agents drew a rebuke from the reputed mob boss when they produced personal papers, telephone records, and $1,130 in cash from the master bedroom. "What's this country coming to?" Balistrieri was quoted as saying, as he accompanied investigators on the search at their request. The Federal Bureau of Investigation also tapped the phones of reputed Kansas City mob kingpin Nick Civella's lawyer's office. In one recorded conversation, Civella was overheard discussing clothing. At one point, Civella remarked to an unidentified confidant, "You know, there is a tailor in Chicago who makes suits with a pistol pocket in them." Other Kansas City hoodlums were overheard using the code word Zio in referring to Civella during conversations the Federal Bureau of Investigation recorded. Documents said the talks concerned who would control Argent Corporation's casinos. At the time, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents had seized records linking Glick's firm with Anthony "Little Tony" Spilotro, described as the Chicago family's #1 man in Las Vegas. The disclosure prompted Nevada gaming authorities to force Glick out of Argent and, the Federal Bureau of Investigation said, caused a tense situation between Civella and Chicago mobster Ayupa. Wiretap documents then disclosed the arrival in Kansas City of Ayupa's associate, Jackie Cerrone, on January 11, 1979. Less than 1 week later, the problem of control apparently still existed. A man identified by the Federal Bureau of Investigation as Joe Agosto, the Kansas City connection in Las Vegas, was overheard telling another mobster, Carl DeLuna, that "the problems in Vegas are with our people, the people we break bread with." DeLuna was overheard telling Agosto that if Little T, Spilotro, should contact Agosto, he should tell him, "I don't mind talking to you, but you got to talk to my people. I'm not doing nothing I'm not told to do." A further example of distrust between the Kansas City-Chicago mobsters came to light in this recording made of Civella's brother, Carl Cork Civella, on June 21, 1978. "They Chicago mob don't care about anybody. That's their attitude. It's showing a discourtesy for them to treat somebody Agosto like that we call our friend." In addition to the Chicago grand jury, Federal Bureau of Investigation evidence of Nevada rackets is being reviewed by prosecutors and grand juries in Las Vegas and Kansas City. The assassination of Angelo Bruno, Philadelphia's gentle don, sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld and his South Philadelphia neighborhood alike. Known for his affable demeanor and peaceful leadership style, Bruno was executed in classic mob fashion, a shotgun blast to the back of the head as he sat in his car outside his home. The motive behind his murder remains shrouded in speculation, with theories ranging from internal power struggles to disputes over control of Atlantic City's lucrative gambling and racketeering rackets. As the old guard of organized crime faces challenges from rising factions, Bruno's death marks a turning point in the mob's violent and volatile history. The question now is not just who killed Bruno, but who will seize the reins of power in the chaos left behind. He was always willing to help out the needy and give fatherly advice to the young. Yet state and local law enforcement officials displayed keen interest in the 69-year-old immigrant from Villalba, Sicily, who gave his occupation as a vending machine salesman. Agents watched his modest row house and tried repeatedly to get him to testify about the deep secrets of the Cosa Nostra, or what is more commonly known as the mob. For years, police believed Bruno led 2 lives: the loyal family man who hobnobbed with the neighbors or quickly visited the meat market next door, and the alleged top organized crime boss in Philadelphia and southern New Jersey. Bruno had just finished dinner at Coos Little Italy restaurant not far from where he lived, and was being driven home by John Stanfer, a contractor who had remodeled Bruno's house. On the way, they stopped to pick up a newspaper. Bruno lit a cigarette, and they continued driving until they reached Bruno's house at 934 Snyder Avenue. Bruno then rolled down the power window in Stanfer's Chevy Capri Classic and flicked out the cigarette butt. At that moment, An assassin pumped buckshot from a 12-gauge shotgun at point-blank range into the back of Bruno's head, making a hole the size of a fist. He died instantly. It was 9:54 in the evening. Angelo Bruno was dead. Who killed him and why? And who will succeed him? The speculation started just hours after the South Philadelphia Don was pronounced dead. Everybody had a different angle. Federal law enforcement officials in Washington said the Bruno killing might be the start of a gang war. One newspaper even speculated that Bruno could have ordered his own death. Others pointed to local competitors, according to a United Press international mob informant, whom federal sources confirm is one of their top mob spies. The killing of Bruno was the work of young Turks, the pinstriped mobsters who are eliminating the old, well-known and indictment-prone dons. Both the United Press international source and Detective Lieutenant Joseph J. Delaney of the Paramus, New Jersey, police department agreed that the hit team that took a $250,000 contract to execute Bruno was tied to a West Side New York branch of the mob, which specializes in killings. Delaney worked from 1974 to 1978 for the Bergen County, New Jersey, strike force on organized crime as an undercover agent, amassing 18 arrests, 185 indictments, and 17 mob convictions. Two separate law enforcement sources, Delaney and the New Jersey State Police, agreed that Bruno and Carmine Lilo Galante met in an Atlantic City restaurant on July 10, 1979, in an effort to resolve differences over who would exercise mob control over the newly prospering beach resort. Some sources have alleged Bruno's sit-down with the reputed New York mobster was intended as a stern warning to stay out of Atlantic City. 2 days later, Galante was killed in an Italian restaurant in New York, dying with a cigar in his mouth. Delaney's sources said the orders for the killings of Galante and Bruno came from Mulberry Street in New York's Little Italy. Other sources said the order was given to a 3 or 4 member gang whose leadership is based in Hoboken, New Jersey, and runs a hit team called K Company. The so-called K Company is said to be under investigation by New York City mob investigators probing 18 gangland slayings, including that of Anthony Little Pussy Russo. Many sources say Bruno was eliminated in a struggle for control of the burgeoning Atlantic City gambling rackets, prostitution, loan sharking, and an estimated $500 million in concession businesses within casino complexes. The most widely mentioned successor to Bruno is a man in his mid-30s known to the mob as Frankie D, who reportedly handled Bruno's investment accounts up to $50,000. He's said to be much like Bruno, a nice guy, fair to deal with, and may have assisted in the Bruno killing. Other possible successors include Philip Chicken Man Tester, reputedly known as Bruno's underboss, Frank Sindoni, and Raymond Long John Martorano, who reportedly dined with Bruno and lawyer Jacob Kosman the night he was killed. Dr. Francis Ianni, an anthropologist who has studied the Mafia from its beginnings and written several books about it, said of the Bruno family in an interview, "Their control extended to include Atlantic City and southern New Jersey. Legalization of gambling has brought a good deal of attention to organized crime types. If you're going to gamble, you still have to have prostitutes and loan sharks. It's all connected. The prostitutes are still mainly white, while the pimps are black." Ianni said, "What has been happening in organized crime is that control of the lower levels of the mob is moving from Italians to blacks, Hispanics, Puerto Ricans, and Cubans, which he said is particularly true of street-level operations." He described the Bruno execution as a classical gangland killing, which means it was ordered by New York. And why do the neighborhoods protect the gangsters and the killers? Ianni said, "Generally in American society, people don't condemn organized crime. It is like the new urban western, guys like Jesse James. They are bad things, but they do make fools out of the police. In fact, they are well-loved and admired people." He added, "Angelo will always be around. He was an authoritative figure. He put Atlantic City up for grabs. Nobody has done this before. There will be additional shootings in Philadelphia and New York. Now that's a proposition I can't refuse. So said Frank Balistrieri, reputed Milwaukee mob boss, in a conversation recorded by the Federal Bureau of Investigation last January 10th, reminiscent of actor Marlon Brando's bravado line in the movie The Godfather. Excerpts of the conversation between Balistrieri and Salvatore Librizi, identified as a Milwaukee bookmaker, as disclosed Monday by the FBI, reveal the Balistrieri remark that came when Librizi declared, "Came up with an idea. Going to handle basketball bets. Heavy amount of money." According to the FBI, Balistrieri consented to the move, but cautioned, "Be careful, will you? That's every day, you know. That's enough to nail you, I mean." Later, Balistrieri is overheard lecturing Librizi on the use of relay telephone hookups, in which a telephone listed at one location actually rings at another. The FBI said this ploy is common among gamblers to avoid arrest while taking bets by phone. Balistrieri explained, "You are across the street in an apartment. Say you are taking action bets over here. They, gamblers, are calling this number, but you're over there taking action. They, police, come breaking in, but they ain't going to find anybody in there. You're across the street picking up." Librizi is later overheard mentioning a gambling take, described by the FBI at $45,000, telling Balistrieri, "You got to admit that it's not been that bad this year." In another bugged conversation, this one between Balistrieri and his son John, last October 26th, Balistrieri is quoted in an FBI report as recommending a course of talk and muscle in dealing with an unidentified businessman who refuses to pay more for the use of Balistrieri pool tables and pinball machines. "Just be diplomatic with him, and I'll do the rough stuff," says Balistrieri, according to the report. Between October 29th, 1979, and last February 19th, the time when most of the wiretaps and bugging devices were planted to monitor Balistrieri's conversations, the FBI said it also watched his home at least 50 times. The Milwaukee Common Council has launched a probe into tavern licenses linked to Frank Balistrieri, the alleged Mafia boss of Wisconsin, following FBI revelations of his deep ties to organized crime. Newly released affidavits and wiretap transcripts outline how Balistrieri's illegal operations funded Milwaukee establishments, including La Scala and Leonardo's, which were reportedly fronted by family and associates. Though Balistrieri's name was omitted from liquor license applications, required to disclose all financial interests, the FBI claims he controlled these businesses and used funds from gambling and other rackets to pay their expenses. This investigation comes amid broader federal scrutiny of Balistrieri's role in skimming profits from Las Vegas casinos alongside Chicago's La Cosa Nostra, led by Joseph Aiuppa. As pressure mounts, Alderman Roy Neighbors and Sandra Ho are calling for a full police inquiry, while law enforcement sources suggest the revelations could jeopardize Balistrieri's standing with his Chicago allies. For Milwaukee's Underworld, the heat is turning up. City councilmen are calling for an investigation of the arrangements under which tavern licenses were granted to the family of Frank P. Balistrieri, identified by the Federal Bureau of Investigation as Wisconsin's Mafia chief. The investigation requests were spurred by a United States District Court release of affidavits, transcribed telephone conversations, and other documents relating to FBI surveillance of Balistrieri's business dealings since 1977. Alderman Roy Neighbors, who heads the Common Council Utilities and Licenses Committee, and Alderman Sandra Ho said Tuesday they would request a police inquiry into tavern license applications. The FBI document stated that Balistrieri heads organized crime operations in Milwaukee, reporting directly to Joseph Aiuppa, said to be the chief of La Cosa Nostra in Chicago. The FBI detailed alleged links between Balistrieri's Milwaukee businesses and organized crime operations elsewhere, saying he has traveled to Chicago to pick up illegal Skim money as a reward for helping in the purchase of 2 Las Vegas hotel casinos. The FBI claimed it had tape-recorded conversations of Balistrieri accepting $45,000 in gambling money and approving a split of vending machine telephone operation profits. Balistrieri was said to own a number of bars and restaurants in Milwaukee, which he has fronted by relatives and friends. The FBI reported, Balistrieri is paying bills incurred by these locations from a general fund derived from revenue off of his businesses. These funds are supplemented by income Balistrieri derives from his illegal activities, including his gambling operation. Among the establishments reportedly tied to Balistrieri were La Scala Restaurant, Snug's Restaurant in the Shorecrest Hotel, and Leonardo's Restaurant. But liquor licenses for these establishments did not list Balistrieri as holding an interest. The city requires that licenses include the name of any interested party in the business. Ordinances also prohibit a convicted felon from holding a tavern license, or from holding 50% or more of the financial interest in a licensed establishment. Balistrieri was convicted in 1967 of tax evasion and was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day in federal prison. I will ask the police to investigate, Mrs. Ho said, after being shown the affidavit and license applications. Snug's and Leonardo's are in her aldermanic district. Neighbours said he too would seek a police investigation. Both aldermen said they did not mean to prejudge Balistrieri, as no indictment has been returned against him. Herbert Anderson, a police liaison to Neighbours Committee, said that if asked, the department would conduct a thorough investigation. The FBI had obtained warrants for searches conducted in March of Balistrieri's home and other establishments. A federal grand jury has been investigating organized crime activities in the Milwaukee area since 1979. The FBI documents listed Balistrieri's sons, attorney Joseph Balistrieri and attorney John Balistrieri, as key figures in the family business operations. Joseph Balistrieri said Tuesday the government obviously did not check its sources of information. He remarked, "The document, I don't want to call it an affidavit because that offends all the other affidavits that are filed in courts, is something somewhere between the rantings of Chicken Little and the writings of Mario Puzo, author of the fictional book The Godfather." Law enforcement officials said the court's release of the information presumably embarrasses Balistrieri among organized crime figures. Frank's going to have some explaining to do in Chicago about this, how this happened, particularly if Ayupa's tied into this thing, one official was quoted as saying. Frank Balistrieri, long suspected of being Milwaukee's organized crime kingpin, was convicted on 5 counts of gambling and tax charges, marking a significant blow to his alleged underworld empire. The charges stemmed from his leadership of a lucrative sports betting ring that reportedly grossed over $2,000 daily from 1977 to 1980. The verdict followed a 5-week trial, bolstered by FBI wiretaps and testimony from undercover agents, including Joseph Pistone, who revealed Balistrieri had even offered him a leadership role in the operation. Despite the defense's claims that the FBI had unfairly targeted Balistrieri, the jury delivered guilty verdicts on 5 charges while acquitting him of 5 others. 4 co-defendants were also convicted, while 2 were acquitted of all charges. This trial, highlighted by dramatic evidence like the FBI's sledgehammer raid on Balistrieri's home, has put Milwaukee's mob activities in sharp focus. With sentencing set for December, Balistrieri's fate looms as a pivotal moment in the government's crackdown on organized crime. Frank Balistrieri, identified in court documents as the leader of organized crime activities in Milwaukee, was convicted of 5 gambling and tax charges and acquitted on 5 other charges by a United States District Court jury Sunday. Balistrieri, 65, was accused of heading a sports betting ring that had grossed $2,000 or more a day and operated from 1977 to 1980. 4 other defendants were found guilty on 19 counts and innocent on 2 counts, while 2 defendants, Peter Pituro and John Pisqueen, were acquitted on all charges against them. The 5-week trial stemmed from a government investigation that included wiretapping of the Shorecrest Hotel, owned by Balistrieri's son, Joseph, and a raid on Frank Balistrieri's East Side home, in which FBI agents knocked the front door open with a sledgehammer. The jury, which had to reach 38 separate verdicts in the case, had been sequestered since Tuesday night and began deliberations Wednesday. Frank Balistrieri was accused of 4 gambling and 6 tax charges involving allegations that he had conducted an illegal bookmaking operation that took bets on sports events. He was alleged to have directed the gambling operation. Other defendants were Salvatore A. Librisi, 40, of Whitefish Bay, on the same charges as Frank Balistrieri; Steve DeSalvo, 65, of Milwaukee, on 3 gambling charges; Dennis Librisi, 36, of Milwaukee, on 2 gambling and 3 tax charges; Carl Michelli, 64, of Milwaukee, on 3 gambling charges. Piccioro, 53, of Milwaukee, had been charged with 2 gambling and 3 tax charges, and Piscuine, 76, of Fox Point, with 2 gambling charges. None of the defendants took the stand. All had pleaded innocent. The government relied on tape-recorded conversations and testimony of undercover FBI agents in making its case that the defendants were involved in an illegal gambling operation. FBI agent Joseph Pistone testified that while on an undercover assignment, he was offered a leadership role in the alleged gambling ring by Frank Balistrieri. Defense attorneys contended the prosecution failed to link the defendants to the alleged gambling ring and based its case too heavily on inferences from the wiretapped and bugged conversations. They argued the government had been out to get Frank Balistrieri because of what they called the FBI's mistaken belief that he headed organized crime in Milwaukee. Judge Terrence Evans took over the case on the eve of jury selection for the trial when United States District Judge Robert Warren stepped down. The defense had accused Warren of carrying on a long-standing vendetta against Frank Balistrieri since serving as Wisconsin Attorney General from 1969 to 1974. Evans set a sentencing date of December 12th. A groundbreaking federal indictment has exposed a massive multi-city mafia operation skimming millions from Las Vegas casinos. Dubbed Straw Man, the FBI's 5-year probe unveils a tangled web of mob influence, hidden casino ownership, and Teamster-funded schemes involving notorious organized crime figures from Chicago, Kansas City, and Milwaukee. At the center are Midwest mob leaders like Joseph Aiupa, Anthony Spilotro, and Frank Balistrieri, accused of orchestrating the Skim through Argent Corporation properties such as Stardust and Fremont. With allegations spanning nearly a decade, this case sheds light on the mob's grip over Las Vegas and the deep connections fueling its illicit empire. In a landmark indictment unsealed in Kansas City, 15 men, including some of the most infamous figures in organized crime, stand accused of skimming nearly $2 million from Las Vegas casinos. The charges, part of the FBI's 5-year strawman investigation, reveal a complex conspiracy linking the Chicago, Milwaukee, and Kansas City mobs to hidden interests in casinos owned by Argent Corporation. Among the defendants are Joseph Aiupa and John Cerrone of Chicago, Anthony Spilotro of Las Vegas, and Frank Balistrieri of Milwaukee, fresh off his conviction for illegal sports betting. The indictment alleges these mob leaders leveraged their influence over the Teamsters pension fund to secure loans for casino purchases, orchestrating the Skim to funnel untaxed profits into their operations. The scheme underscores the mob's stranglehold on Las Vegas gambling, with Balistrieri and his sons among those accused of using Argent-controlled properties like Stardust and Fremont as cash cows. This far-reaching indictment follows convictions in the Tropicana skimming case and marks another blow against the Midwest Mafia's grip on the casino industry, shining a light on the shadowy nexus of organized crime, union power, and Las Vegas's glittering underworld. 15 men, including several reputed organized crime bosses, were charged in an indictment unsealed in federal court Tuesday, with skimming nearly $2 million from Las Vegas casinos. Justice Department officials said the indictment was one of the most far-reaching ever returned, linking groups in numerous cities to hidden ownership of Las Vegas casinos. One federal law enforcement source said, "It reads like a who's who of organized crime in the Midwest." The indictment, originally returned on September 30th, concludes a 5-year FBI investigation codenamed Straw Man. The probe included extensive telephone wiretaps in several cities and has already resulted in the conviction of 5 men on charges of skimming gambling revenue from the Tropicana Hotel. Skimming is the practice of taking casino gambling proceeds before they are counted for state and federal tax purposes. Several of the defendants had been arrested, said FBI Director William H. Webster. They are Joseph Ayupa, 76, identified by federal authorities as a leader of organized crime in Chicago; Anthony Chiavala Sr., 64, Anthony Chiavala Jr., 35, Angelo LaPietra, 52, John Cerrone, 69, all of Chicago; Anthony John Spilotro, 45, of Las Vegas. Spilotro was identified by the department as a Las Vegas representative of the defendants. Among others charged were Frank Balistrieri, 64, identified in court by the FBI as the leader of organized crime in Milwaukee, who was convicted Sunday in federal court on 5 gambling and tax charges stemming from a sports betting ring. Carl A. DeLuna, 56, described by government attorneys as one of the most feared organized crime figures in Kansas City, who was sentenced Monday to 30 years in prison for his role in the Tropicana skimming operation. Other defendants include Carl Civella, 73, of Kansas City; Peter Tamburello, 51, of Kansas City; Milton Rockman, 75, of Cleveland; Joseph Balistrieri, 43, of Milwaukee; John Balistrieri, 34, of Milwaukee; Carl Wesley Thomas, 51, of Las Vegas. Also named as conspirators were Nick Civella, James V. Torello, Alan Dorfman, and Joseph V. Agosto, all of whom are deceased. The indictment alleged that the defendants conspired over the past 9 years to establish and maintain hidden interests in gambling operations in Las Vegas casinos owned by Argent Corporation, a Nevada holding company headed by Alan R. Glick of La Jolla, California. Argent has controlled at various times the Stardust, Fremont, Hacienda, and Marina casinos. Glick was not indicted. A spokesman for Glick, John Scanlon of La Jolla, said Glick was not a willing partner with the defendants. The government said the hidden interests violated Nevada state law requiring casino owners and operators to be licensed or found suitable for licensing. Only one of the defendants, Carl Thomas, had obtained a license from the Nevada Gaming Commission. The indictment identified Thomas as one of the Las Vegas representatives who served as fronts to represent the undisclosed interests of the defendants in Glick's gambling operations. It also alleged that Ayupa, Balistrieri, and another defendant, Joseph Lombardo, 54, of Chicago, used their influence with trustees of the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund on matters relating to Glick. Webster said a fugitive warrant had been issued for Rockman. Joseph and John Balistrieri are attorneys and the sons of Frank Balistrieri. Carl Civella, Thomas, Anthony Chiavala Sr., Tamburello, and DeLuna were convicted in Kansas City in July for conspiring to skim $280,000 from the Tropicana. A tax indictment was also unsealed Tuesday against DeLuna, Carl Civella, and Tamburello, charging them with filing false federal income tax returns for the calendar years 1977 and 1978, based on joint income derived from various ventures and not reported to the Internal Revenue Service. Nick Civella, the former boss of organized crime in Kansas City, died in March of lung cancer. Torello of Chicago died of cancer in 1979. Dorfman, a former Teamsters Union insurance executive, was gunned down in Chicago soon after his conviction, along with Roy L. Williams, former Teamsters president, and Lombardo on charges of attempting to bribe a United States senator. Agosto died in August of a heart attack after testifying against his former associates during the Tropicana skimming trial. The latest indictments against 15 reputed mob leaders from Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland mark a critical blow to the Midwest Mafia's grip on Las Vegas casinos and Teamsters pension funds. This sweeping case, the culmination of a 5-year FBI probe, codename Straw Man, details a $2 million skimming operation from the Stardust and Fremont casinos, exposing the deep underworld ties that spanned multiple states. Law enforcement experts are calling it a potential dismantling of organized crime structure, with figures like Joseph Aiuppa, Frank Balistrieri, and Carl Civella among those charged. The use of extensive wiretaps and electronic surveillance signals an aggressive new strategy in prosecuting entire crime families, threatening to shift the mob's focus toward riskier ventures like drug trafficking. As defense attorneys push back against the charges, the indictments stand as a defining moment in the federal crackdown on organized crime's golden era in the Midwest. The sweeping casino conspiracy indictments Tuesday of reputed mob leaders from Kansas City, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland have delivered double-fisted blows to the underworld's organization in the Midwest, law enforcement officials and legal experts say. For one, the United States Justice Department's unprecedented and extensive use of 15-year-old wiretap statutes exposes the mobsters' compelling fraternal ties across the Midwest. Moreover, the indictments of leading members of the Chicago crime family, which by most accounts has long directed illicit activities throughout the Midwest and the West, could disrupt the underworld's framework. The entire structure is under siege, Chicago Crime Commission Director Patrick Healy said. Stephen Trott, an assistant United States Attorney General in Washington, said, "This indictment is one of the most far-reaching that a grand jury has ever returned, linking mob operations in various states. And besides raising the usual spectre of gangland violence to determine replacements for the high-ranking mobsters facing prosecution, the case also calls into question the financing of future mob operations in the Midwest, now that mob influence on Teamsters pension funds and Las Vegas, Nevada casino receipts has been revealed. Still, no one is writing organized crime's epitaph in the Midwest. It's always been premature to predict the demise of the Mafia, said G. Robert Blakey, a recognized organized crime expert who worked in the Justice Department and now teaches law at the University of Notre Dame. Indeed, some lawyers for the 15 persons charged in the conspiracy indictment expressed confidence that their clients will be acquitted. "They don't have a liar like Joe Agosto this time," said a defense attorney, referring to the late Las Vegas entrepreneur-turned-government witness who helped obtain convictions of Kansas City mob leaders in a Las Vegas skimming case earlier this year. The 15 defendants are accused of conspiring to gain control and skim receipts from 2 Las Vegas casinos, the Stardust and the Fremont, formerly owned by Alan Glick, a one-time protégé of Alan Dorfman, a former Teamsters pension fund official. Mr. Glick is reportedly being sought by underworld hitmen, according to court documents and testimony. Concluding a 5-year investigation, a federal grand jury in Kansas City returned an indictment Tuesday, naming all 15 defendants in all 8 counts. If convicted, each defendant faces a maximum penalty of 5 years imprisonment and $10,000 in fines. From Kansas City, Carl J. Civella, 73, and Carl A. DeLuna, 56, suspected mob leaders in Kansas City, and Peter J. Tamburello, 51, a longtime associate of the Civella family. From Chicago, underworld leader Joseph Aiuppa, 76, and his ranking comrades John P. Cerrone, 69, and Joseph Lombardo, 54. Also, Anthony Chiavala Sr., 64, Anthony Chiavala Jr., 35, former Chicago policeman, and Angelo LaPietra. From Milwaukee, alleged family leaders Frank Balistrieri, 64, Joseph Balistrieri, 43, and John Balistrieri, 34. From Las Vegas, Anthony J. Spilotro, 45, said to be the Chicago family's representative in Las Vegas, and Carl W. Thomas, 50. From Cleveland, Milton Rockman, 75, a longtime mob associate and financier. Named as conspirators in the case, Nick Civella, the late head of the Kansas City mob, Alan Dorfman, former Teamsters pension fund official, James Vincent Torello of Chicago, and Joseph Agosto. Dorfman was slain gangland style in Chicago earlier this year, while the other three died of natural causes. The indictment states that more than $2 million was skimmed from the casinos and distributed to the mob leaders in the Midwest. Court documents and the indictment also indicate that skimmed funds were given to former Teamsters President Roy Lee Williams of Kansas City, whose union's pension funds financed Mr. Glick's business interests in Las Vegas. Organized crime experts across the country raised their eyebrows at the far-reaching nature of the indictment. The skimming trial earlier this year was limited to the Kansas City mob hierarchy and its control of the Tropicana casino, from which Agosto operated. Civella, DeLuna, the elder Chiavala, and Thomas were among those convicted in that case and faced long sentences. Tamburello was acquitted. But Tuesday's indictment threatens the very structure of organized crime operations in the Midwest, experts said. Chicago controls everything west of Chicago, said William Romer, a retired FBI agent who traced organized crime for 30 years. If these indictments hold up, you've gone a long, long way toward destroying the structure of organized crime in Chicago and throughout the Midwest. Moreover, authorities said the unprecedented widespread use of electronic surveillance, including the bugging of lawyers' offices, in the simultaneous Las Vegas and Teamster investigations, does not bode well for future mob activity. This set of wiretaps is unusual in its aggressiveness and willingness to go beyond the traditional limited use of electronic surveillance, said Mr. Blakey, who helped draft the 1968 legislation allowing wiretap use. If these kinds of cases can be brought for a sustained period of 10 years or so, it could radically change the mob, he added. They can withstand prosecution of individuals, but can they withstand prosecution of entire families? Mr. Blakey said, the use of electronic bugging in the Las Vegas investigations and the Teamster pension case that netted the bribery conspiracy conviction of Mr. Williams marks the first time that provisions of the 15-year-old federal wiretapping statute have been so widely invoked. In fact, James Avance, director of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, said on Tuesday that state investigators have long suspected underworld infiltration of casinos, but Nevada laws do not empower them to electronically monitor interstate telephone communications the way federal laws do. Mr. Avance said he does not expect that the unveiling of an allegedly elaborate casino conspiracy by several Mafia families will hamper casino business in Las Vegas. He said the indictment and other recent cases prove that authorities are vigilantly monitoring casinos. Now that Teamster funds and the Las Vegas casinos are drying up under the scrutiny of federal investigations, some experts predict that if the current mob leadership is imprisoned, a new underworld cadre may look to drug trafficking and other means to fill their coffers. It's just like any corporate business, Mr. Healy said. These guys won't be hesitant to fight over takeovers. The question is whether the younger generation will have a different philosophy about getting into areas the older generation thought was taboo, like drugs. While mob watchers and government officials not directly connected with the case readily discussed the potential impact of the indictment Tuesday, government prosecutors and FBI agents in Kansas City and Chicago declined comment, contending that pretrial remarks could jeopardize prosecution. However, in court documents on file here, prosecutors have hardly minced words in discussing the mob's influence in and attraction to Las Vegas. Organized crime interests operated with impunity in violation of Nevada law and virtually ran a major casino from Kansas City without the knowledge or consent of the Nevada Gaming Commission, a recent document filed by the Organized Crime Strike Force alleges. However, defense attorneys and others had a different reaction to the expensive, lengthy government probe. Mr. Goodman, the well-known defense lawyer who is representing De Luna and Spilotro in the case, said that government authorities should not be enthusiastic. This just gets the heat off the fact that they're unable to cope with street crime, and I don't think the public buys it, he added. They're just trying to justify their existence. Agosto's lawyer, Stanley Greenberg, a former federal prosecutor, added, I have a lot less fear of the Cirones and the Lombardos than I do of my ability to go away for a weekend without getting my home broken into. Tamburello's lawyer, Robert Baird, said he believed his client was indicted again because government prosecutors were unable to gain a conviction against him in the skimming trial. He said he planned to file a motion seeking dismissal of the indictment against Tamburello on grounds of double jeopardy. The latest federal indictments not only target the Midwest Mafia's grip on Las Vegas casinos, but spotlight two of the syndicate's most enigmatic figures, Cleveland's Milton Rockman and Las Vegas's Anthony Spilotro. Rockman, a 75-year-old with deep family ties to Cleveland's mob hierarchy, is accused of acting as a money courier in the skimming of millions from Argent Corporation casinos, including Stardust and Fremont. Known for his low profile and a sparse criminal record, Rockman has now emerged as a central figure in the mob's financial web. Meanwhile, Spilotro, the feared enforcer and Chicago's man in Las Vegas, faces his fifth indictment this year, adding to a list of charges ranging from murder to leading a nationwide robbery ring. Despite his reputation for ruthlessness and links to more than 24 gangland killings, Spilotro has largely evaded conviction, symbolizing the mob's ability to operate in the shadows. As the indictments unfold, they expose the far-reaching influence and complex power structures that have sustained organized crime from Cleveland to the glittering casinos of Las Vegas. Milton Rockman is the latest in a long line of reputed Cleveland-area underworld leaders to be prosecuted by the federal government. Just a year ago, James Licavoli, considered by law enforcement authorities to be the mob chieftain in Cleveland, was convicted in a murder conspiracy involving the bombing deaths of two men allegedly vying for Cleveland mob control. In January of this year, Angelo Leonardo, considered to be Licavoli's underboss, was sentenced to life in prison for his role in a drug ring. Joey Gallo, another reputed ranking Cleveland mobster, was convicted alongside Leonardo. Authorities have long suspected that Rockman, 75, was a courier of money skimmed from Las Vegas, Nevada, gaming houses. The indictment made public in Kansas City on Tuesday alleges that Rockman was involved in the hidden ownership of the Argent Corporation, which controlled the Stardust and Fremont casinos. Until now, records indicate Rockman has maintained a low profile, being arrested or detained for questioning only 6 times since 1929. His only conviction was in 1940 for blackmail, for which he was fined $500 and served 90 days in jail. His association with Cleveland's leading underworld figures began in childhood, according to published reports, and extended to marriage. He grew up on the city's east side with John Scalish, who held the rank of syndicate boss until his death in 1977. Scalish married Rockman's sister, and Rockman, in turn, married Scalish's sister, and converted from Judaism to Catholicism. Rockman could not be reached for comment at his business, Buckeye Vending Service, nor at his home in Beechwood, Ohio. Of the 15 persons indicted, only Rockman could not be located by law enforcement authorities on Tuesday. Anthony Spilotro, 45, long identified as the point man for Chicago crime syndicate activities in Las Vegas, Nevada, has been the subject of frequent federal indictments, but has been convicted only once, for filing a false federal loan application. His indictment Tuesday brings to 5 the number of cases pending against Spilotro, an alumnus of the Chicago underworld. Federal investigators say Spilotro rose through syndicate ranks as an aide to Joseph the Clown Lombardo, the Underworld street boss convicted alongside former Teamsters Union President Roy Lee Williams of conspiring to bribe former United States Senator Howard Cannon of Nevada. Spilotro, feared as a mob enforcer and alleged to be directly or indirectly responsible for more than 24 gangland executions, was indicted earlier this year in Chicago for the murder of 2 men in 1962. Last month, he was named in a Las Vegas indictment for allegedly ordering the slaying of a man who had become a government informer. A second indictment returned at the same time named him as the leader of an 18-man robbery and extortion ring. He also was charged in 1981 with running a nationwide fencing operation from his Gold Rush jewelry store on the Las Vegas Strip. That case has not yet gone to trial. Carl Thomas, 51, the other Las Vegas man indicted Tuesday, was in court Monday being sentenced to 15 years in prison for his part in a Las Vegas casino skimming operation. The unsealing of federal indictments on Tuesday has sent shockwaves through the Midwest's organized crime network, targeting key figures in Chicago, Milwaukee, and beyond. For the first time in decades, felony charges were leveled simultaneously against the leadership of Chicago's powerful crime syndicate, including Joseph the Doves Ayupa and John Jackie the Lackey Cerrone, both considered architects of the mob's dominance in the region. The indictments also ensnare Milwaukee boss Frank Balistrieri and his 2 lawyer sons, accused of profiting from hidden ownership in Las Vegas's Stardust and Fremont casinos through a multi-million-dollar skimming operation. Bolstered by undercover FBI agent Joseph Pistone's testimony, the charges threaten the structure of the Chicago-led network, revealing deep ties to Kansas City and Las Vegas. As the Chicago mob faces unprecedented pressure, this case marks a pivotal moment in the Justice Department's battle against organized crime in the Midwest. Federal investigators believe the powerful Chicago crime syndicate coordinates underworld activities throughout the Midwest. Tuesday's indictments mark the first time in decades that felony charges have been leveled simultaneously against the leaders of Chicago's crime organization. Joseph the Doves Ayupa, 76, was identified by federal prosecutors in court Tuesday as the head of organized crime in Chicago. It is a position he is believed to share with Anthony Accardo, although both men are in their 70s and have delegated control of day-to-day mob activities. Accardo was not named in the indictments unsealed Tuesday. Ayupa's nickname stems from his one prior conviction. He was found to have violated the Federal Migratory Bird Act for possessing more than 100 dead doves, a protected species. The birds were found in the trunk of his car. Federal investigators say daily mob operations have been left to John P. Cerrone, 69, nicknamed Jackie the Lackey. He was identified before a United States Senate subcommittee earlier this year as the underboss of the Chicago syndicate and, for all intents and purposes, the leader of the Chicago family of organized crime. Previously convicted in a gambling case in the 1970s, he is said to be the most vigorous member of the triumvirate with Accardo and Ayupa, controlling Chicago mob affairs. Joseph the Clown Lombardo, 54, is one of 5 capos, or street bosses, working under Cerrone. He was convicted earlier this year, alongside ex-Teamsters President Roy Lee Williams, in a conspiracy to bribe former United States Senator Howard W. Cannon of Nevada. Lombardo is awaiting trial in Chicago for allegedly bombing a suburban Chicago home as part of an extortion plot. Testimony and wiretaps played during his earlier bribery trial with Williams indicated that he was the mob's link to financial manipulation of the Teamsters Union and its massive pension funds. Angelo LaPietra, 52, described by investigators as a capo on equal footing with Lombardo, is the reputed leader of mob activities on Chicago's South Side, but has previously succeeded in keeping a low profile, according to Patrick Healy, executive director of the Chicago Crime Commission. LaPietra has never previously been indicted. Investigators say LaPietra's power is diminished by the fact that his South Side turf is among the mob's least productive territories. His seat as capo is the last one filled, one investigator said. But they noted that with Tuesday's indictments, 4 of Chicago's 5 street capos are either jailed, under indictment, or under intense scrutiny by federal investigators. Anthony Chiavala Sr., 64, and his son, Anthony Jr., 35, are both former Chicago police officers. The elder Chiavala and his brother George, once a Teamsters union official, are nephews of the late Nick Civella, the former reputed leader of organized crime in Kansas City. The elder Chiavala is awaiting sentencing for his part in the recently concluded Kansas City skimming case and was described during the trial as a link between the Kansas City mob and Chicago leaders Iupa and Cerrone. His son was recently convicted by a federal jury in Chicago on charges of robbing a jewelry salesman. Federal grand jury indictments unsealed in Kansas City on Tuesday are but the latest woes for Milwaukee's Underworld boss, Frank Balistrieri, and his 2 sons. On Sunday, a federal district court jury in Milwaukee found Frank Balistrieri, 65, guilty on 5 gambling and tax charges. His 2 lawyer sons, John, 35, and Joseph, 43, face a series of trials in the coming weeks and months on charges of insurance fraud and extortion. The elder Balistrieri faces trial on the extortion charge as well. Frank Balistrieri was identified as early as 1961 as the leader of the mob in Milwaukee, and in 1969 he was identified in a United States Senate investigation as the leader of one of the country's principal organized crime families. An FBI agent's affidavit on file since 1979 in Las Vegas, Nevada, reported that the Milwaukee crime family answered only to the Chicago mob. The Balistrieri organization was the first in the Midwest to be publicly stung by recent court revelations of the FBI's deep penetration into organized crime. Special Agent Joseph Pistone went undercover for 6 years, assuming the role of a mobster in New York, Milwaukee, and elsewhere. After surfacing about a year ago, his testimony has been used to convict 6 members of the Joseph Bonanno crime family in New York on racketeering, murder, and extortion charges. Agent Pistone testified against Frank Balistrieri in the recent gambling and tax trial, and is expected to be a key witness early next year when all 3 Balistrieris are tried on extortion charges. The 3 are accused of using threats to extract protection payments from 2 men who wanted to set up a vending business. The 2 men were undercover FBI agents. Until the gambling conviction, Frank Balistrieri had been convicted only once in 1967 for evading income taxes, for which he served less than a year in prison. Neither of his sons, who have been practicing attorneys, has been convicted of a crime. All 3 are accused in the indictment unsealed Tuesday in Kansas City of maintaining a hidden ownership in Argent Corporation in Las Vegas and of benefiting from the skimming of proceeds from 2 casinos controlled by Argent, the Stardust and the Fremont. A rising star turned potential liability, Alan Robert Glick, once the public face of Las Vegas's lucrative casino empire, now lives in fear behind fortified walls. In a twist worthy of a crime thriller, Glick, who ascended from obscurity to owning 4 high-profile casinos with backing from the Teamsters pension fund, finds himself at the center of a sweeping federal case against Midwest mob bosses. Indictments allege Glick's Argent Corporation was a front for a multi-million-dollar skimming operation orchestrated by Chicago, Kansas City, and Milwaukee syndicates. With armed guards protecting his family and a looming mob contract on his life, Glick faces the ultimate gamble. His testimony could dismantle decades of underworld control or make him their most infamous casualty. In less than 6 years, and in ways that are not fully understood, Alan Robert Glick, the 41-year-old dealer and son of a Pittsburgh scrap iron merchant, rose from a $200 a week job as a real estate salesman, here to become the nominal owner of 4 Las Vegas casinos worth $160 million. Now, federal officials say, Glick is likely to be the star witness at the upcoming trial of the same men who helped him acquire those Las Vegas properties. A trial that promises to be the most spectacular in the Justice Department's 2-decade history of organized crime prosecutions. If the government's case is successful, it could break the mob's 30-year hold over some segments of the Nevada gambling industry, and for the first time, fully illuminate the still shadowy relationship between organized crime and the Chicago-based Teamsters Union's Central States Pension Fund, which held the mortgages on Glick's casinos. Among those charged with skimming Glick's casinos are Joseph Ayupa and Jackie Cerrone, whom federal agents have identified as the 2 top leaders of the Chicago crime syndicate. Ayupa, Cerrone, and the 13 other defendants, the men the government alleges are the top mob bosses in Las Vegas, Kansas City, and Milwaukee, were arraigned in Kansas City, Missouri, 2 weeks ago in what some federal officials jokingly called the largest aggregation of suspected organized crime figures since their elders gathered 25 years ago at Appalachian, New York. As lawyers for the defendants prepare to deluge the government with pre-trial motions, Alan Glick is surrounded by armed guards in his art-filled mansion overlooking nearby La Jolla. It is Glick's decision to talk about those mob figures to several federal grand juries that has forced him to hire the guards. Federal and local officials said Glick, a lawyer and former army captain who served in Vietnam, is wise to take such precautions. They said informants told them that the crime syndicate has issued a contract on Glick's life. "He's a cool guy," Glick's lawyer said recently, "but my concern is that there are a lot of bad people out there." Glick remains virtually unapproachable, a stool pigeon living in a gilded cage. A reporter seeking an interview with Glick at his home was referred to his business office at Cobra Energy Group, a La Jolla firm with coal mining interests. A secretary at Cobra said Glick was not there and wasn't expected soon. Glick no longer has his penthouse office in the Stardust Hotel or his private jet. All that remains of his brief but spectacular career as a front man for the Chicago-based organized crime family is the house. Visitors to the Glick mansion in happier days say Glick, his wife Kathy, and their 2 children live extremely well. The house, estimated to be worth more than $1 million, is large and expensively furnished, its walls adorned with Picasso drawings, a Cézanne watercolor, and a Rembrandt sketch. Its distinctive design was featured in Architectural Digest. Glick's Argent Corporation, the name short for Alan R. Glick Enterprises, is also French for silver, bought the first of his Las Vegas hotels, the Hacienda, in 1973. The next year, Glick began to assemble his Las Vegas empire in earnest when he purchased the Racket Corporation, successor to the Parvin Dorman Company, for $62,700,000, borrowed from the Teamsters Pension Fund. By the mid-1970s, Glick held gaming licenses and Teamsters mortgages for 4 Las Vegas hotel casinos: the Stardust, the Fremont, the Hacienda, and the Marina. A former agent for the Nevada Gaming Control Board said, "Glick got what he wanted: power, prestige. He was the man of the year in this town, and the mob got what they wanted. They got the skim." As early as 1975, a Labor Department study of links between the Teamsters Pension Fund and organized crime cited Glick as one of the fund's borrowers who was affiliated with reputed mobsters. In 1978, after years of watching Glick closely and puzzling over his meteoric rise to power, federal agents obtained a warrant to search his Stardust penthouse. In seeking the warrant, the Justice Department asserted that money taken from the Argent Corporation goes back to Joseph John Ayupa, whom it identified as a principal lieutenant to Anthony Accardo, then head of the Chicago crime family. Accardo is said to have retired to Palm Springs, California. The affidavit also alleged that Glick was acting as a straw party controlled by the organized crime syndicate, then headed by Accardo. Last month, a federal grand jury in Kansas City, Missouri, agreed that Argent was a sham and that as mortgage holder for the Las Vegas properties, Glick's role had enabled the Chicago mob to circumvent Nevada laws that bar suspected underworld figures from owning casinos. On October 11th, after hearing testimony from Glick and others, the grand jury indicted 15 mob leaders and associates on charges of conspiring to help Glick obtain the Teamsters' mortgages and of looting the casinos of $2 million in gambling revenue. Glick was named in the indictment, but was not charged with any crime. Federal investigators say Glick's testimony would be invaluable at the trial of the 15 organized crime figures, and one agent said Glick would be summoned for certain. But Glick's lawyer, Terry Christensen, said he doesn't yet know whether the government will call on Glick to testify. "They leave us alone," Christensen said. "However, they do have subpoena power." Christensen also said he's glad that 2 Kansas City mobsters, Carl DeLuna and Charles Moratina, were in prison on other charges when they were indicted with the others on October 11th. The government suspects DeLuna of plotting to kill Glick. According to documents on file in United States District Court in Kansas City, the FBI learned a year ago that the crime syndicate had marked Glick for death. That information came from Joe Agosto, a Las Vegas figure whose testimony helped convict DeLuna and 4 others in a separate casino skimming racket. Agosto, who died of a heart attack while under federal protection in August, said last year that DeLuna said Glick was finito. Agosto, once a neighbor of Glick's in La Jolla, also said DeLuna had asked him to draw a map of Glick's home and the surrounding grounds and instructed him to order a supply of dynamite. Agosto said he never found out what was done with the dynamite. Some investigators believe that Glick is in far more danger now. There weren't 15 hoodlums under indictment a year ago, one San Diego investigator said. Even before Glick became a heavily guarded mob target, information about his past was difficult to uncover. 2 former business associates familiar with Glick's early operations in San Diego are dead. One apparently died of a heart attack, but the other was the victim of a gangland-style murder. Largely because of this, the Glick mansion, located on a winding road of big houses and expansive lots, has been turned into a defended compound. 6-foot-high iron and wooden fences enclose the property, which includes the main house, a guest house with tennis courts, a swimming pool, and a gymnasium. Decorative iron fencing is backed by steel chain link and masked by heavy shrubbery. Heavy gates block the driveways, and a reporter seeking Glick had to announce himself through an electronic communication system. "Only those who are known and expected are admitted," a guard said. "No one in the family goes anywhere without guards," Glick's San Diego-based lawyer said. Glick's children, aged 14 and 9, are under armed guard when they go to a private school, and Mrs. Glick was recently seen attending a cooking class in La Jolla under similar protection. This wasn't always the case. In 1981, Mrs. Glick opened the house for a tour sponsored by the San Diego State University Arts Council. A report published in a local newspaper described the Rembrandt sketch, Chinese ivory carvings, the Cézanne watercolor near Glick's desk in a black and red study, and the Picasso drawings on the walls of the wood-paneled study. Another item from Glick's past interests, authorities. His relationship with a Milwaukee lawyer, Joseph Balistrieri, son of Frank Balistrieri, who federal agents have identified as the organized crime boss of Milwaukee. The Balistrieris were among those indicted on October 11th. Though little is known about its origins, Glick's relationship with the Balistrieri family goes back several years. According to a former investigator for the Nevada Gaming Control Board, records found in Glick's Stardust office showed the payment of $100,000 in legal fees to Joseph Balistrieri. "I performed services. I got paid," Balistrieri said 2 years ago when asked about the money. "Is that illegal?" He added that he did not want to talk about Alan Glick. How Alan Glick and I became friends is a series of circumstances known to Alan and myself. Joseph Balistrieri's late maternal grandfather, John Aliotto, was identified by federal agents as having been the head of organized crime in Milwaukee until he stepped down in 1963 in favor of his son-in-law, Frank Balistrieri. Federal agents said, however, that they have evidence showing the Balistrieri connection led to Glick's becoming a casino operator in Las Vegas. They said Glick was chosen as organized crime's Las Vegas casino frontman because of his association with Balistrieri and his willingness to cooperate. With mob backing, federal prosecutors said Glick obtained the multi-million-dollar loans from the Chicago-based Teamsters pension fund. The loans provided most of the money he used to buy the casinos. Glick, they said, ran the casinos for the syndicate. At one point, Glick, with $160 million in loans outstanding, was the biggest borrower from the pension fund. Court records show he has not paid back the loans. Court documents also show that agents learned about Argent's mob connections in 1978 while tapping the telephones of Kansas City mob figures in an effort to solve a syndicate killing. Instead of picking up leads to the murder, FBI agents monitoring the court-approved phones learned about Argent and skimming from casinos. Federal authorities had long suspected that the Chicago mob was behind the Vegas skimming. But until the wiretaps, they did not know that mob bosses in Kansas City, Milwaukee, and other cities were involved. In 1980, Glick was forced to sell the Stardust and Fremont hotels, along with his other Las Vegas holdings, and pay a $750,000 civil fine after his Nevada gaming licenses were revoked. The revocations followed Nevada gaming officials' discovery that millions of dollars had been skimmed from the casinos. Argent sold its casinos to Trans-Sterling Corporation, headed by Alan Sachs, who is also identified by FBI agents in court documents as an associate of Chicago crime syndicate figures. Trans-Sterling still operates the Stardust and Fremont, while Sachs operates the Sundance in Las Vegas. The owners of the Hacienda and the Marina are not linked to the Underworld, investigators said. 5 days before Glick sold his Las Vegas properties, according to documents in federal court in Las Vegas, government listening devices recorded a conversation in which Carl DeLuna told the late Nick Civella, then the head of the Kansas City mob, that he had ordered Glick to give whatever story you want, just get out of the casino business. On the strength of other information from wiretaps, agents raided the Balistrieris' homes and offices. They found a contract dated June 15, 1974, in which Glick, then the sole owner of Argent, promised to sell 50% of this multi-million-dollar corporation to the Balistrieris on demand for $25,000. Federal prosecutors said the contract is a vital link in proving that Glick was a front for organized crime. Glick's lawyer declined to comment on the contract. However, the lawyer noted that Glick's voice was not heard in any of the wiretaps, which an FBI source in Washington confirmed. In 1969, the nearly penniless Glick, new to San Diego, was struggling to get ahead. His first job, for which he earned $800 a month, was in the legal department of a San Diego real estate firm. In January 1971, however, he took a $2,000 a month job with San Diego's Saratoga Development Corporation, a building contractor. Glick has said that contrary to what the FBI contends, he developed his interest in Las Vegas casinos while with Saratoga. He said it was during this time that he made contacts with Teamsters union officials that helped him win approval for the Las Vegas loans from the pension fund. After working for Saratoga for a year, Glick became half owner of the firm in 1972, under an agreement investigators find interesting. They point out that while Saratoga was worth several $1 million at the time, Glick obtained a 45% interest in it for just $2,500. Investigators said this agreement is remarkably like the deal the Balistrieris made with Glick regarding Argent only 2 years later. In 1975, when Glick was on his way to becoming a casino tycoon, Saratoga entered bankruptcy proceedings. The company's other 45% owner, Dennis Whitman, was subsequently convicted in a $1.6 million fraud scheme. While in the Federal Correction Center in San Diego in 1978, Whitman died of what the medical examiner called a heart attack, silencing a potential source of information about Glick. In 1975, Tamara teacher Rand, another former Glick business associate, was found shot to death in the kitchen of her home. Investigators discovered that Rand, the 54-year-old wife of a San Diego physician, had lent Glick $500,000 and had filed a $560,000 fraud suit against Glick a few months before her death. Federal agents said Glick's associates feared that the suit might expose the inner workings of some of his business arrangements. Shortly after Rand was found with 5.22 caliber bullet wounds in her head, Glick called a press conference to deny involvement. But Kenneth O'Brien, San Diego's deputy police chief and then a homicide captain, said Glick refused to answer any questions about the killing. After her death, Justice Department lawyers identified Rand as a prospective witness against Glick. The case remains unsolved.